This is episode number 269 of Truth Telling with Elizabeth D'Alto. I'm your host, Elizabeth D'Alto, and today's guest is Michaela Boehm. Michaela was actually on the podcast almost 3 years ago. Her first episode was episode number 19. So we've come a long way since then, and Michaela has also come a long way. So many things going on in her life. She just published a book. She lost her entire home, her entire property in a huge fire last year. And that's one of the things that we really dug in around in this episode, how she was able to move through the grief, the shock, and the trauma. She was all the way on the other side of the world teaching in Amsterdam when she got the news, and she had to get home to her property. Everything was still under evacuation when it happened. And so it was really cool to hear how someone who's been in deep practice and teaching and cultivating these skills and these tools for such a long time use them in the face of a really major life event and a tragedy even. So we talked about that. We talked about the difference between cultivation and devotion, which I really appreciated because this is something that in the self-help and the spirituality and the personal development worlds, people want tools and people want practices, but not everyone is willing to show up with the discipline required. So I talked to Michaela about how to be in your feminine, which is something that she talks about in her upcoming book that she has developed a nonlinear movement practice around. And how do you do that while also having the discipline to sometimes do things like stick to a strict diet so you can have the energy you need to show up for your work or travel or have the energy for 16-hour work days as she was putting in when she was working on her book. So we explore, what I really like about this conversation is we explore the application of a lot of the things that she teaches and helps other people with as well. So this is definitely going to be an episode that you want to listen to more than once. Take some notes, share it up with your friends. And the show notes, because we have a bunch of resources, we'll tell you how to get your hands on Michaela's book, are over at untameyourself.com/TT-269. Again, that's untameyourself.com/T as in truth, T as in telling -269. Let's get into the show. Yeah, so fun, everyone. We have Michaela Boehm back on the podcast. Michaela was on, and it was like 2 years ago, maybe more than that. It might have been like 3 at this point. Yeah. I'm losing track of time, which is weird anyway. But since we last had a conversation, I've got to spend some time with Michaela in real life. We literally ran into each other in Paris when I was traveling last year. She has written and published a book. Her entire life and home burned down in a gigantic fire. Your work has taken a totally different, not totally different, but, gone in a different direction from where you were before. So much. We have so much to talk about. I'm pumped. So the place to start is always the question we start with is, what is a truth that's having a big impact on your life right now?
I read this morning when I read the little email that you sent out, and I was like, shit, here we go. and you kind of said it already in when you said with the fire, right? The truth that is really impacting me this year and since the fire is how impermanent things really are. And it's, one thing to know that intellectually, and it's another thing to see it in other people. But when it actually happens and you wake up in the morning and you feel fine, right? And half an hour later, your entire existence has gone. Yeah. And everything that comes with it. And this is not the first loss I've encountered in my life. So I was just reminded again that the truth of things being incredibly volatile and fickle, and anything could happen at any given time. And I think one of the big things that keeps us sane in a certain way as humans is that we pretend it's not happening.
Right.
Because you somewhat, like you're on this high wire and any moment it could be over. But that's actually true.
Yeah. So what was that like? I think, were you in Amsterdam, when it happened?
I was in Amsterdam when it happened. Yeah. Yeah. It was, it's hard to describe what it was like because several things happen simultaneously in my existence when stuff like that happens. Yeah. Right. So of course there's all the normal feelings of oh, fuck, like that you want to lose it, of course. You want to completely lose it. But the set of circumstances was such that I couldn't lose it because I woke up at 5 a.m. in Amsterdam, having to pack up, clean up the Airbnb, and get to the airport to take a plane to Munich and then a car to Salzburg, where my parents live. This was at the end of the teaching season in the winter. I was going to go home for a few days, and then I was going to go to London and shop and play a little bit, and then I was going to go home for Christmas. So as one does when one is in an Airbnb, I was cleaning and doing everything, and then I was waiting for the Uber, and I was scrolling through Facebook as one does. Not anymore. I've disciplined that, but I was waiting for the Uber, scrolling through Facebook, and I see that a local Facebook group we have here in our community had a little note, like how they give you notifications. It said the group changed from closed to open because of the fire. I'm like, fire? So I call my husband, and it's like the most insane moment. I'm going, I heard there is a fire. And he goes, yes, the house is burning. So I called him when he was watching the house burn down.
Wow.
Yeah. And so then he, of course, had to go because he had to get out. He had a broken leg. He couldn't evacuate. He was trying to save the house. It was a total, pandemonium. And I essentially didn't know what to do with myself, Do you scream? Do you cry? Do you, like shit yourself? That's the feeling I had. Well, full disclosure, like you don't know what to do.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You pass out, you want to scream, but what I had to do is get in an Uber.
Yeah.
And go to the airport and function and make decisions on how was I going to get home, what was going to happen. And so it set in core, in effect, like a whole 36 hours or so till I was home because, of course, getting home, getting a last minute flight. And then I had to talk my way through the evacuation line because, of course, it was still active fire and burning and the whole hill behind my house was still on fire. But I managed to make it up. And I came home on Wednesday night. The house had burned down. Monday night was one of the first houses to burn, the first area. And, you can't see anything. You have to wear a gas mask. It's, the oak trees on my property are still burning. And so I set my ass down on a meditation cushion in the meadow behind what used to be my house. And I sat there all night in the dark and waited, for like the sun to come up. Is going to make me cry again.
Yeah.
So brutal. And at the same time, it was really, really good because it was this feeling of face it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Look at it, look at it as what it is and as it's happening. And it was hugely helpful because I spent, 4 hours sitting there and slowly, other than the embers of the oak tree and what was still burning, I could see the whole massive devastation, and I could be with it. And then I had to get up and get shit done.
Yeah.
Because I have animals and fences had burned and some of the animals died and some of the animals were missing. And, it was, pandemonium is a nice way to describe it.
And I'm wondering, as a person with such deep practices of your own, who teaches that, and so much of it revolves around embodiment. I mean, to even be able, I'm sure some people are listening like, what? She sat there and was just with it for 4 hours? Like, what does that even mean? But I feel like that's probably something you were able to do because of who you are and what you do and your deep practice and like your years and years and years, like on that meditation cushion and all the things. Like,
yes.
I feel like this is like the ultimate embodiment experience, no?
It is. It certainly took everything I had to stay with it and in my body. And, as you know, I've developed a whole method that centers around releasing trauma from the body. And I essentially did that for the 11 hours it took me to get home on the plane.
Yeah.
And just on the plane, moving, wiggling, moving, crying. And I just allowed myself to cry, and I really didn't care, I mean, I bawled in front of the customs agent because, they look at your passport and like, so where are you coming from? Where are you going? Where's home? And I'm like, I don't have a home anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was an interesting time because I had to be both totally open to the extreme pain so that I could function, because I knew if I'd shut down everything, and I'd become essentially catatonic. So it was an extreme experience. And I've had this once before when my previous teaching partner died. It was the same thing. It was so bad that it was ecstatic.
Yeah.
It's an odd thing to say, but it had an ecstatic quality because it was so insane that I had to constantly be with my body. And I'd wake up the first couple of nights. I mean, you'd go to sleep with a mask on and all the windows closed and air purifiers on, and still in the morning there'd be soot on your bed. And, no electricity. First, we didn't have running water, no food, of course. We had nothing. I mean, everything was gone. I had literally all that was in my suitcase, and I had packed lightly because I didn't want to shop in London. Right? So I didn't even have clothes. I was in my work outfit, the first 2 days or so. And I would roll out of bed, and I wouldn't even stand up. I'd just roll out of bed on my hands and knees and start moving my body.
Yeah.
And then, you do what you have to do. And it certainly helps that this, so to speak, wasn't my first rodeo, but it certainly also helps that I have a lifetime of practice, and resource within that practice.
So where were you in your book writing process? Were you done writing the book when this happened or no?
Well, I was done writing the book. The book had been submitted in the fall, and I had received the second round of edits back, and I had to finish the edits by December 15th. And the house burned December 4th, and I figured I'd be home December 6th or 7th, and then I was going to just do the edits and be done with it. And then I got an extension till January 15th, and I had to I didn't even have a place. We had no internet. And there was we didn't have phone service, even cell phone service till after Christmas. So I had to just suck it up, majorly, and discipline myself to sit down. And I did. And I'm really glad I did, because, of course, in a situation like that, any kind of pettiness or gripe with edits or any of those things kind of go out the window. And it was pretty much like, okay, well, let's see what needs to be done. And then I delivered the book, the final stuff on January 15th.
Having had to go back through a book you'd already written after having this deeply life-altering experience, what was it like? Did it change anything? Did you tweak anything? Was anything different in the editing after you just had that, or did everything was just like the same?
Everything was the same, and I'll tell you why in a second, but I did want to write about the experience, but I decided not to. And the reason I decided not to was kind of a twofold consideration, one of which was it was so fresh.
Yeah.
And I hadn't had a chance to actually examine what was happening.
Yeah.
And two, it would have been odd to tack that on somewhere, right? It just didn't go, but it didn't really change what I wanted to write about. On the contrary, what was really interesting, and this was kind of a very odd situation, my editor lived also in Ojai. So through just, she lives there. The publishers are New York publishers, but my editor lives in Ojai. Her house wasn't affected, but she was, the smoke and all of that. And she actually said to me, we did like a cleanup day the moment we could, so my animals would be okay. She said, watching you makes me know that the practices in this book work.
That's cool.
Because she thought that the practices were too simple, and they weren't very esoteric in their application. And there was a lot of, as you know, because you know me a bit, and, I'm not the goddessy kind, meaning we're not doing stuff that's outside of the realm of existence. And I think that was a bit of a, I wouldn't say I know that was a bit of a, who's going to do this? But then, of course, it became apparently clear that these were actually the things to do.
It's cool.
And so that was very, very cool. Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah.
So I really am so curious. I want to know, here's the order I want to do this, because I want people, I do know quite a bit about you, but I want the audience to know a bit more, especially in terms of like the content of the book and like what it's all about. But, and then I really want to have a conversation about discipline, because in my experience, this like wild feminine, this wild woman, as I've been embodying that over the last several years myself, the thing that I've had the biggest challenge with is discipline. Mm-hmm. And you are pointing towards this discipline that you had to have to get through this experience. But then also you and I were chatting offline for a moment, and I know you're on a super restrictive diet, which to me is like absolutely out of the realm of possibility for me. So I really want to know how you're navigating that. But first, like, walk us through, what is the Wild Woman's Way?
Well, the Wild Woman's Way is a whole body of work that I've created over the last 25 years, and in my personal practice, over 30, which is insane in itself. I can't actually believe I'm in my 50s now. It's crazy. 51 to be exact. But it's a whole body of work that deals with the engagement with our body. And I see the wild woman, and with it the wild feminine, as the part of us that's connected to nature and to the tribe and to the wisdom that's been passed down through millions of years, really, because as long as humans have existed, the natural instinct is the thing that's kept us alive. And everyone alive today, this will change pretty soon, but everyone alive today is alive because they were connected to their instincts and they did the right moves and listened to their bodies. That's definitely changing. And hence I wrote the book. So it doesn't change all the way. But it's the wildish nature, right? It's the part of us that's connected to our cycles, to the moon, that can feel things, that's intuitive, that operates within a tribe and community, all of those parts of us. And the archetype, the archetypal engagement with the wild woman is kind of an interesting thing for me, because I'm both Jungian trained and was trained in a lineage that does deity yoga, right? Where you become and merge with a female deity via visualization and embodiment. And so, which is, I found out, of course, when I studied Jungian archetypes, it's the same engagement. You let yourself, or you avail yourself of the world wide web of natural information, right? You plug into something that's much bigger than you. And so the Wild Woman's Way is an exploration through the body into becoming the woman we are, not the woman we think we should be, or the woman, that's aspirationally something that she thinks she could be loved for, but us as and the glory of that. And it's a set of exercises and explorations and embodiment practices and considerations that make it so you become you, like the glorious, glorious you. And then from there, you can learn skills and you can add flavors to your experience.
Yeah.
Right? Without compromising the very fabric of who you are.
I'm obsessed with this. This is like the whole basis of everything I do. I've articulated it as reclaiming and redefining womanhood for the 21st century. But I sometimes question even the choice of those words, because we're not redefining anything. It's just like what was all finding. We're just like finding what's like always been there. But I like the way you said that. It's like not this aspirational thing that you believe will make you lovable.
Yes.
or
Yes.
attractive to others.
Yes.
That is so challenging. And I know you've worked with so many people. It is unbelievable to me the depth to which our conditioning has a hold of us around that.
Yes. Yes. Crazy. Right? And not just from men or the patriarchy, but more so in a certain way from women, from other women. And that's not a popular thing to say because there is still this big belief that the sisterhood heals all, but that's not traditionally true for a number of reasons, right? Now, we can have that and we should have that, and certainly that's the natural way in a certain way. But even within the natural way, when you look at tribal structure amongst women, there is, so to speak, fighting and jostling for rank within the structure. And when the structure has been established, then everybody can relax. And then everybody knows their place. So competitiveness isn't the issue. It's when people can't let it go.
Yeah.
Right? When they can't let it go. And that's why I'm saying sometimes it's other women that make it so much worse, because we all have grown up with these insane standards.
How?
Right?
Yeah. I'm curious. There's a word that comes up a lot now, which I actually really love, but I'm curious how it fits into that tribal structure, is sovereignty.
Yes. Yes. Sovereignty is one of my favorite words.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Because that's the thing. You can't, and you'll hear me say this over and over and over and over in everything I teach in podcasts and in the book, is you can't actually relate with anyone sexually, intimately, friendship-wise, business-wise, till you know where you begin and end. And till you know, and this is to me is the answer to everything from consent questions to sovereignty and everything in between, is until you can reliably notice, listen to, and translate into your mind the messages of your body, you can't be trusted. Yourself and somebody else, you just can't be trusted.
This is a major mic drop, because this is something that I've come to realize. Trust is another big, huge core thing in my work, trusting yourself, right? And my hypothesis, if you will, or thesis statement is, you don't need to worry about whether or not you can trust others. Like, some of us are like, I have trust issues. The only trust issue is whether or not you trust yourself. Because once you trust yourself, things with other people kind of take care of themselves.
Yes.
But one of the things that I've realized in my own exploration and study and embodiment of trustworthiness is exactly what you just said. When you know yourself, where you begin and where you end, that is only then can you begin to trust and be trustworthy. And I've realized I can't trust people who someone could be honest but untrustworthy, because if they are not connected to and they don't know themselves, I can't trust you.
No.
Because you're unplugged from something that is the actual truth.
That's correct. And then you have these experiences. Mind you, I've had them too, right? It's not like you completely grow out of them. I remember specifically in my 20s, in my late 20s, I had that a lot. You have an interaction with somebody, right? And then you leave. And then at some point you go, wait, this wasn't okay.
Yeah.
Right? And so that, of course, is the source of all kinds of trouble, because if you don't know it wasn't okay till you're in the car or at home or 3 days later or 10 years later, you cannot actually stop it. You can't set a boundary. You can't assert your needs. You can't protect yourself. You can't get rid of it, right? So you're powerless based on the fact that your head and the deep intelligence that is your body, the early detection system that is your body, are not synced up. Yeah. But it's like the Bluetooth connection between those two pieces has irretrievably broken, right?
Not connected to Wi-Fi.
Not connected to Wi-Fi, right? It's happening in the body. It's always happening in the body. The body never misses a beat, right? But can we hear it? And then once can we hear it, can we translate it into cognitive understanding and usable action?
Usable action for the love of all that is holy and sacred and real.
Yes.
Okay, you said something before that I want to come back to for a moment that relates to this, how all of this is changing. How and why?
Well, I think one of the reasons it's changing is that now we have a life in which being connected to ourselves is no longer necessary, for the most part. Because when you look at how much time, now I'm not talking about everyone, of course, right? And all circumstances, but when you look both out publicly, when you observe people and the people I know or teach, right? How much time we actually are plugged into another piece of information, software, so to speak, in the form of computer, internet, your phone, apps, social media, all of that. You can essentially operate mostly from the head if you wanted to. And of course, the inertia of the body nowadays, because we are sitting a lot, right, and driving and flying and, whatever, it's in front of the TV. One of the things that really astounded me last time I was on a trip in the US was how many people spend that much time in front of a TV. Just incredibly sedentary lifestyle. And so the body needs movement to detect things, to report them, also for health and all other kinds of reasons. And we no longer have that. So things are changing very substantially. The amount of inflow makes it so we get dull and numb. And also, we are no longer, for the most part, in actual life-threatening situations. So our early detection systems are, first, because we are so much more numb, and certainly because they're no longer used as much, are not as active.
Yeah.
People are not as clued into things anymore, and their bodily reaction to things isn't so good anymore. I watched the other day, there's a little school close by my house, and there were some people walking on the ex-football field, and somebody somewhere else was practicing and throwing a ball, and this woman was on her phone texting while she was exercising, and the ball came and hit her in the head. And for the most part, humans are wired that if something comes at you, you will at least flinch before it happens, even if you don't see it, right? Because we have these mechanisms that allow us to have some radar around us so that if some big predator comes and looks at us from behind from a tree, we can, our spidey senses. She had zero awareness that something, and the kids were screaming and, and it is all happening like, 4 seconds or so.
Yeah.
But that is what's happening. And of course, that also means we're not only not connected to our environment and the dangers of that, but we're certainly not aware of what's happening in our body. If she can feel it, a ball hurtling towards her, it's highly unlikely she felt any pain in her body somewhere.
This is really interesting, and I love the timing of it, because the other day I was driving around here. I just moved to Marina del Rey. I was in like Venice or Santa Monica or something, and it was almost having, I felt like I was watching a movie or a TV show or something, and I was just like watching all the people walk by. Literally everyone was on a device, and I was like, none of these people have any idea what's going on around them.
No.
None of these people. And for me, just the way I was raised, but like old school Italian grandpa from Brooklyn, right? My parents, like every time, Puerto Rican grandma, every time I leave the house, someone was reminding me to know my surroundings, to be careful, to be safe, and to essentially be like watching my back and know what was going on around me. So I'm so wired that way that like no matter where I am, sometimes people perceive me like I'm not being present with them. It's like, no, I'm present. I know exactly what you're saying to me and what you're doing, but I also know what's happening in like every freaking corner of the room. And if there's like a threat or someone shady walks in, like it's happening because I'm like literally plugged in, and just realizing how disconnected people are from that. But you said something that I'm super curious about. You said that it's not necessary anymore.
Well, no, you can survive
Right.
without
Got it. Not
that,
like
right? That's what I
vital,
mean with
but not
not
that it's
vital.
okay.
No, no, not that it's okay,
Okay. I
but
was like, what?
what I mean is in the past, in not so distant past, in a couple of 100 years, if you weren't clued in to what
Yeah.
was happening around you, you wouldn't live that long. You
Yeah.
probably didn't get to procreate, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you did, hopefully the next generation learned something from it. Nowadays, you can live an entire life without knowing these things and still survive.
Got it.
Right. So it's not necessary, meaning
Basic
people
survival.
basic survival isn't really, I mean, of course, there's still areas, there's war-torn areas and things where basic survival is all there is. But
Yeah.
I'm talking us in LA or us in New York or, like
Well, even
Western
Western.
civilization.
Yeah. Yeah. That is so interesting to me. And this is why I'm so appreciative of people like you. This is why I'm so passionate about like embodiment work, like be in your body. All right. I have another question for you. This is a selfish one because something that I've been in inquiry around and kind of exploring lately is in your body of work, experience, beliefs, teaching, practice, do you see any distinction between the wisdom of the body and the wisdom of the heart?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a great question. On one end, I would say to me, they are one and the same. And on the other end, how I would probably distinguish it for myself, if I would have to. And certainly we do that a bit when we work with, the kind of more sexual domains of co-ed practice and stuff like that. I would say that the wisdom of the body is somewhat free of emotional content. So, whatever happens in the body happens in the body. And some of that registers as power, some of that registers as fear, some of that registers as anger, some of that registers as arousal. But like, for instance, arousal can be arousal for sexual reasons, arousal because you got really angry, arousal because hormones happen, right? So arousal in itself doesn't have an emotional component. But of course, the heart, and when we say the heart, what I mean, of course, is the living, feeling, emoting, plush, beautiful and awful set of sensation that is our feeling dimension, right? That feeling dimension, of course, influences the body, and the body is certainly influenced by our feelings. So you can't, take them apart.
Yeah.
But the cultivation of the heart, to me, has it has a devotional quality to it.
Yeah.
Right. So does the body, of course, right? Meaning, and this brings us to the piece of the diet and discipline in a moment, right? The cultivation of the heart and the cultivation of the body has to be in the service of something greater than yourself, ideally. When I'm saying has in my world, right? This isn't the gospel. It's just the gospel according to Michaela.
Yes.
It's not the gospel, right?
Thank you for like making that. This is my issue with like the guru type people who were like, this is the truth. It's like, it's a truth, homie.
Yes, exactly. And it's heavily influenced by your preferences and your own body mind, right? And that's the thing that we always have to remember. But for me and in my work and in my personal exploration, the heart is the cultivation of compassion towards others, compassion towards self, love in all its form, the good, the bad, and the ugly, but in service of something greater than us, in the service of love or in the service of the divine, however you want to phrase that for yourself.
Yeah.
And so to me, the bodily wisdom is the wisdom of letting the body does what the body does best.
Yeah.
The less you can fuck with that, the better. that heart cultivation, that to me has a whole other layer of exploration and richness and vastness in the body.
Yeah.
And they can't be separated, of course. But if
Right.
you would, then that's how I would separate them.
I love that because since I've gone through this whole, and you know this, this healing experience since my last relationship, which was very intense and very traumatic for me, I was very tuned into the body wisdom, but the journey into the heart has been something that I'm like, this is different. There's a different texture here. And that distinction, I've been like working on the distinction myself. And you pretty much just articulated a lot of what I hadn't put into word yet. I love the words cultivation and devotion.
Yeah, so do I. Yeah.
Yeah. What devotional practice? And this is a lot of, like, this is your work. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, to me, you know, I'm always very, very careful. And like you said, it's not the truth, right? And there's many other ways to get where I want to go.
Yeah.
But to me, the devotional quality of everyday life is what I live for, both in my work and my personal life. So I want to be able to have the most ordinary task, or I should say, I want my most ordinary task to still be a devotional act, because most of my life are ordinary tasks.
Yeah.
So when I look at how much time I get to spend in organized practice or organized engagement around the things that are very meaningful to me, and how much of my life is spent doing ordinary tasks, I'd say it's probably 80-20 on a good day, you know. So those 80% need to also be counted, and they need to count, because otherwise, why do them, right? And so my teacher particularly was very, very adamant on learning how to just be, just be. And so, my washing the dishes, I often talk about washing the dishes because for some reason I really enjoy washing the dishes. It's one of the things I've done even as a teenager. My parents would have these huge parties, and I'm super introverted. So I just went into the kitchen and took care of the enormous amount of dishes. And I loved that because there's nothing else happening. You wash the dishes, but washing the dishes is an act to the divine, right? There's no part of me that's not devotional when I wash the dishes or scoop horse shit or write a new website or whatever the hell. You have to just remember that. And the way you remember it is essentially through the body, right? The embodiment and a certain kind of disposition. And so the disposition is one of serving something greater than oneself.
Yeah.
Not in a woo-woo, new agey or martyr way, because that's also important. It's not martyrium, right? It's just you get on with it.
Yeah, yeah. There's a little aspect of suck it up to that, yeah?
There is a little aspect of suck it up to it, but that's really minor. So how it occurs in my body, because I have lots of those moments, is let's put it this way. Let me say it differently. When you have to do things, they require energy, right? They require the same amount of energy regardless of if you want to do them or don't want to do them.
Yeah.
However, if you don't want to do them, the not wanting to do them runs a counter current to the thing you need to do. So you have to go here, but this goes this way. So you're actually creating drag on your ability to do it.
Yes.
So by not refusing the reality of what you have to do, this is true for emotion, relationship, and the washing of the dishes, you are removing the drag, and you now have this energy that pulls back while you're trying to pull forward to harness into that direction, or it's free energy to do other things.
Yeah.
And so what to me lies at the very, the bare bones of devotion is that you go, well, there's something bigger than this, and I'm using my free energy to orient, to towards
Yeah,
this
yeah, yeah.
for the sake of all beings, so to speak. That's the feeling, right? I'm putting words on something that's a feeling, but
Yeah.
the bodily sensation of that is an expansion, a forward expansion.
Yeah.
And it's an opening of the heart and it's an opening of the body. So when I suck it up, I don't suck it up as a denial. I suck it up for something greater.
I love this so much. I don't suck it up as a denial. I suck it up for something greater. And so, and correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things I wanted to ask you next was, what is the difference between, or how do devotion and cultivation interact with each other? But I'm feeling like this is probably the place where that happens. Yeah.
Yes, there's an intersection, right?
Yeah.
And so devotion in itself is beautiful in whatever way it takes, but devotional action has an element that needs cultivation, and that is skill. So, and this is, by the way, where a lot of people get really, really messed up because they conflate those things. They conflate spiritual practice with skill development. They conflate skill development with personal development for the sake of becoming a better, human or better lover or something like that. So devotion in itself is happening. It doesn't require anything. It's just there. It's to tap in, right? But for us to be able to move devotion as a body and as a mind and as an emotional body, there's cultivation needed. And the cultivation usually has to do with developing the skills necessary to make the body devote in the way it wants to devote.
Yeah.
So, there's classic examples of this, of course, in music, where it's the easiest to say. You can be divinely inspired to play the piano for the sake of, the benefit of all human beings. But if your body doesn't know how to play the piano, your body is incredibly ill-equipped to open our hearts into ecstasy via piano playing.
Yeah.
So as much as that's sometimes poo-pooed in the spiritual circles, you're going to have to sit your ass down and practice the piano.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's the only way you're going to skillfully, you can do this and hope it opens people's hearts, but you could also just learn the appropriate skill for the instrument.
Yeah.
And then use your skill that you have cultivated and combine it with the devotion you have into a full experience. And any good artist in their own right knows that, right?
Yeah.
Any good lover in their own right knows that in a certain way, if they have both the devotional, quality and the skill level. And so cultivation is essential for allowing your being to do the things you want to do.
Yeah. So you're connecting a dot I didn't know I needed to be connected. There's two things in my life in the realm of creative expression that I've always felt like a longing towards, like a devotion to, but that I couldn't express because I don't have the skills yet. And I've been like slowly developing them, but not with any like major dedication or consistency, because I think consistency is a real part of the cultivation, and that is dance and comedy. I just started doing stand-up comedy, and I'm like novice. Like, I'm a naturally funny person, but in terms of like writing jokes and being funny on purpose, I'm literally like step 1A,
Yes.
right at the bottom end of the being. And the same with different types of dance. Like, I've been taking salsa lessons for years. I'm a decent salsa dancer, but like I take these long breaks. There's no like this consistent cultivation and practice of my skills. During periods of when I do it consistently, that's when I up level. And that, I think, is the cultivation, if I'm understanding right. Yes?
That's the cultivation. And that brings us to, how do you combine your wild feminine nature with discipline?
Yes.
Right?
I do not want to be disciplined, Michaela.
Because you are devoted to something that gets you out of bed onto the dance floor, right? Or out of bed and on your table writing jokes. And so the key there to proper discipline is that you're moved.
Yeah.
Right? That you're moved in some way greater than yourself, greater than just an outcome, right? If all that well, let's put it this way. If you are not this, but let's just say, right, somebody goes, I want to be a stand-up or an actor or whatever, right? But let's say a stand-up comedian, because then I'll get chicks.
Right.
Right? Or then I'll make money and people will love me or whatever, right? Then that's sufficient a motivation for some people because they feel lack and they want to fill the lack. But if you're actually not coming from a place of lack, right, but you're coming from a place of fullness, you want to learn something because it will make you fuller and more joyous and more embodied and more alive. And yes, it will probably make you a different human being because anything we learn adds to us, right, in a mostly good way. Well, some things not so much. But what you'll have to feel is that the motivation and the drive has to come from the intense devotion.
Yeah.
And then that engenders cultivation. That makes it that you go, okay, I don't want to, but I'm going to do this. And then that is a much better motivator than accountability models, which I'm very much against. This is a whole other story, right? I think if somebody else has to hold you accountable, you're forever infantilized. And so, so, which is, that's a whole other pet peeve of mine, when we talk about men's groups and stuff like that, but we're not talking about men's groups right now. You need to find what it is that makes you want to do it. And then that creates discipline. And the discipline can't come from lack or fear or, just a rote brutalizing yourself for the sake of getting shit done.
Yeah.
That's not ideal. And that has big repercussions in the long run. So you were asking me earlier, how do I reconcile having at the moment, very, very strict eating regimen with being who I am? Well, because I'm incredibly, I don't know how I can say this. I'm incredibly lit up and motivated and devotionally motivated to be out there and travel and teach. So my life in the last 4 or 5 years has gone very strongly towards teaching internationally and many, many places and many workshops. And I now train people, to have teacher trainings and all kinds of stuff because I have a very strong feeling that I have to give these things forth. Part of that has to do certainly with my age. But that's the least of it. I would say that the motivating factors are when I received the lineage, which happened almost 4 years now, about 4 years. It was like, oh shit, nothing happened at first, right? It was like almost like oh well, oops, that's really, I mean, not oops in a oops she died, but oops, I had no idea I was going to be the one who has to bring it forth, right? Because I really didn't think about that. I had, I had a life to live. And then the next step was, oh shit, this comes with a huge weight. And the weight was the weight of having to find somebody to pass it on to. And then the next thing was, wait, I already have people to pass it on to. This is what I do for a living. Oh, maybe I should, teach more. That was the thing. So that all said, I have a very, very, very strong feeling of doing this for the benefit of whomever I can touch. Yeah. And of course my own. I'm not saying I'm like saint-like in that way, right? I'm really enjoying it. And it's also how I make a living. But that drives me taking care of my body in a way that it functions optimal.
Yeah.
So this brings us back to the cultivation of the vehicle of your transmission, so to speak, right? My vehicle, meaning my meat body, for some reason, and I only found this out while I was writing the book, because that's when I started it, because I was home for once and, I was sitting all day, so I had to look at what was I eating, all of those kind of things, because I did like 14, 16-hour days during the writing of the book and sitting, right? So I discovered that having this very, very restrictive diet was giving me optimal performance and optimal mood. Because I'm, of course, also now at an age where hormones are starting to go all over the freaking place, right?
Yeah.
So I had to look at how can I do what I do and function well
Yeah.
and feel okay. And that's what it was. So it didn't come from a place of, oh, I need to lose weight, or, oh, I need to stave off aging. Those are all benefits. It came from a motivation of, how can I get off a plane in Melbourne after 18 hours and function?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Damn.
And that was the thing. So how can I cultivate the skill in my body needed to function after an 18-hour flight well, right? And not be messed up by jet lag too much or brain foggy. And this was the answer. So I still feel as wild and crazy as I ever have in my, in my disposition. But I no longer use eating as a way to express that at this moment in time. Now, mind you, I have moments where I'm like, fuck it. And I have little cheats. I want to say that, right?
Yeah.
So often I don't have my allotted carbs and I have a glass of wine, right? Or a piece of chocolate. And so it's not like, it's not like these things are ironclad, because you always have to strike the fine balance between denying yourself and doing what's best for you. And that is a very, very fine balance.
Yeah.
I, for one, cannot live with denying of myself in a certain way. Right. But I actually, at this particular moment in time, don't feel it as such. I just feel it as optimal situation for what I'm doing. And this is, by the way, true for most of my engagement that has to do with discipline.
Yeah.
Which is where I'm going, well, this is just the easiest and best way to get this done. This is how I want to cultivate certain things, and that cultivation takes this.
Yeah. I appreciate this so much. It's really helpful for me. I'm hoping it's also super helpful for people listening. Over the last several years, and I've talked about this on the podcast, people know this is something that I've been just kind of wrestling with after being in fitness for many years and also living on the East Coast. There was a distinct, when I moved to the West Coast, and just the lifestyle went from being someone who's walking probably miles a day, public transportation, doesn't have a car, to someone who's driving, and then also going from being a personal trainer where I'm out and about to running an online business. In a huge fell swoop, the amount of physical movement in my life drastically decreased. And then I also was in a situation where I took on some comfort eating. So I started to eat in a much different way and move much less, and my body changed. Yes. And I've been holding on to anywhere between 20 and 30 pounds over the last 4 or 5 years that has never felt like it's mine. And I'm not saying this in a body image, thinner is better or whatever, but just literally my physical body has felt like this is weird and, what's going on here? And having a desire to change it, again, not because I want to, what you said earlier, fit into the aspirational thing that I think will make people feel attracted to me and love me, but because I know that the quote extra weight is a physical expression of these choices I've made and this different lifestyle that isn't necessarily in alignment for me. But there's just been so much emotional and weird, and there's been so much for me to sift through around it. And so I've recently been coming to a place where I've started moving more and realizing how I'm going to do it, whatever way I'll actually just get it done. It has to be enjoyable, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And this really, really resonates for me. The discipline as a function of both the cultivation and the devotion to the bigger thing.
Yes.
Because I've noticed, with my former partner who would shame me about my body, I was never motivated to lose weight to look better, so he would stop doing that. In a way, I was almost a middle finger, maybe I'm just gonna gain more weight. Maybe you'll actually leave if I do that. It was weird, unhealthy dynamics, right? But this, I'm now motivated. I'm cool, if I look better, great. But I need to function differently. So that was very helpful.
Yeah, I think that's the really important pieces. It has to come from a place of functionality, and it has to fit with whatever else is is there, right?
Yeah.
And certainly, I don't even know how to say that. Nothing trumps moving your body.
It really doesn't.
Nothing. It's, I mean, it's one of those things. I sometimes say this in workshops when we start, when we do like relational or sexual practices, people stand across from each other. We do like warm-ups and stuff like that. And people don't want to move. They just came from the office. They just want to go straight into the juicy stuff. And it's like, no, 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 no. Sex and relationship still happens in the body. And so far you can't armchair it. You can't think your way into embodiment. You can't think your way into feeling. You must move your body. Your body has to come online. And that is still so true. And I think most of the things emotionally as well as physically that weigh us down can be accomplished or can be looked at by moving. But who has time, right? And that's once again, that's when you have to look at what's optimal for your situation, your circumstances, versus what's the prescribed truth.
Yeah, I'm really curious, due to the deep embodied nature of your work, is it, I don't want to make an assumption, but I would guess most people showing up to your stuff are like very able-bodied?
No, actually, no.
Oh, cool. Because that's what I wanted to know. I wanted to know for people who have, restrictions around their ability to move their body, how this lands and works for them.
Well, like for instance, I don't think you know much about it, but nonlinear movement method, which is the thing that we use for trauma release and for pleasure practice and stuff like that, can be done laying down. It can be done in a wheelchair. I actually know somebody who does it in a wheelchair. Mm-hmm. It simply allows for the body to engage in its natural mechanisms of release, right? We have these natural mechanisms of somatic release that come through shaking and moving and allowing the body's flow to wash things out. And so even if you're not able-bodied, meaning you can't go to the gym, you can't run, you can move your body, you can do this in a chair. And it's essentially the engagement, that the fluid engagement of your body somewhere. And sometimes when I've worked with people who are very traumatized, I used to see people in a rehab, all they could do is this. That's all they could do, or blink. And that's often enough in the first step to create motion in the body.
Yeah.
And I just want to add to that. Yes, ideally you want to do things that give you cardiovascular benefits and all of that. But that's not where you start. Where you start is unfreezing yourself from that hunkered down state that's either caused from injury or trauma, past experiences, or habit.
Yeah, yeah. And so for anyone who's listening, not watching, when Michaela said do this, she was literally just flicking her little pinky finger. Yes. I appreciate that, and I'm glad, because just something I'm really more conscious and aware of are, I'm a super able-bodied person, and for many years, even when I was in fitness, it didn't occur to me, of course. And I'm in gyms, I'm in that environment with like the dominant able-bodied population, and so it's good to know that these things are also accessible at different levels for people who don't have that.
They are. And, a lot of the nonlinear movement practice actually really came together after I had this really bad knee injury, that I couldn't do anything. I couldn't walk. I was very, very active. And as you know, I have a piece of land that requires lots of walking around and doing things. And I couldn't walk. I just couldn't walk, right? And so, and I was doing quite a bit of yoga back then and, practices of that, and couldn't do either of those. And so all I could do is be on my hands and knees and sometimes on my back in a static position and move my spine and move my neck and, kind of stretch things out so that I wasn't going completely inert. And over time, that was added into the things I was already working with people.
Cool. I love this. So to wrap up, is there anything I didn't ask you, especially related to the book? I mean, obviously, when I interview people and they have books, I'm usually just like, go get the book, people. We don't need to tell you everything that's in the book, because that's why it exists. But anything I didn't ask about the book or anything you want to share about that, just on the way out here?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that I'm very excited about in the book is that there's essentially three components to the book. So there is the kind of informational component that really educates on how the body works, why we can feel things, how the body processes pleasure and trauma and all of those things. So there's a very good educational component to it. Then there's a whole section that's kind of like my view on things. And my view on things, of course, is a combination of having done over 40,000 counseling hours in my lifetime, right?
Yeah.
And teaching and my own stuff. So I'm super happy I got to talk about how do you choose career and children and partners and dating. And so that, I'm really kind of gleeful about having been able to delineate these things with hopefully a slightly different viewpoint. And then what I'm most excited about is that the whole third part of the book is practices.
Yeah.
So it was really cool because I got to read my own audiobook. And so I got to narrate my own practices. And
That's amazing.
That was pretty good. So yes, I'm super excited about it. And of course it comes out next week. And it's both thrilling and a bit scary.
Yeah, and so at the time of recording this, it's mid-August. So by the end of August, it'll be up. And you know what? We had someone clear. I think this might go up on August 27th because I had someone cancel and I couldn't reach them. So I think we'll bump it up. So by the time people are listening to this, they will be able to get the book. Yes. So Michaela, you know how much I enjoy you. I appreciate you so much. I have a really, really deep appreciation, especially for women who are just older than me, who've just like been on the planet longer and been practicing longer and who have like paved the way for like the kind of work that I do. I just like have a lot of respect and appreciation for that. And the way you share yourself. And something I really especially noticed during this conversation that I love is how you take your time to go, how do I want to say this? Because I feel like there's so much damage and harm that is done from teachers because they just want to have the answer and they just want to like spit it out and they want to be right. And I just notice and appreciate your commitment to really saying the thing that is like true and accurate and in a way that aligns for you. So thanks for demonstrating that.
Well, you're very welcome. And I want to add to this because it is very important. In this moment, right? And that's the thing. One of the things that is sometimes hard to stomach is that things I believed 10 years ago are no longer the things I believe now.
Yeah.
Right? There's things that are always alive, right? And the through line, but there's also things that change. And I think it's really, really important to know. This brings us back to your first question. What's the truth? Well, the truth is everything's constantly changing.
Yeah.
And so our mind, our body, and our viewpoints have to change with it.
Yeah.
Like it or not. So thank you.
Yeah. And where's your favorite place to direct people? So The Wild Woman's Way is the book. They can get it on Amazon and bookstores everywhere, right?
That's right. And my website, michaelaboehm.com, which I'm assuming you'll spell out on the
we'll put it
show notes.
Always in the show notes.
And you're the first one to hear this because we talked about it before. Next week, the new website will be live.
Yes.
So it's brand new website, brand new offerings, lots of really cool photos of all the things that no longer exist. Because I had photos taken of all my altars and all my deities, which I'm so grateful now because they live on now on my new website. And I'm very, very happy
It's like poetic too.
It is poetic. And that's mostly why I'm so excited about the website because every single page has photos of these deities and these things and power items and everything that I've collected over the time. And now that's gone, but it's still there and I get to
memorialized in a way.
Yes.
Cool.
So next week, new website. By the time you post this, new website will be up.
Amazing. Cool. So we'll all get to see it. All right. I don't really want to hang up, but we kind of have to. So thank you so much. You're amazing. I'm excited for the book myself. And I hope everyone else will check it out too. So, all right, Michaela, we'll see you later.
Bye.
Welcome to a brand new forum series regarding gender, relationships, love, and sexuality. seeking original solutions and insights into old issues. Our first guest in this is also our first female guest, Michaela Boehm, whom we are delighted to have on. Her education is in Jungian psychology, cognitive behavioral therapy, hypnotherapy and NLP. She traveled and co-taught with David Deida for 13 years and is the only one authorized by him to present his work. She is trained extensively in multiple forms of yoga and bodywork and is a lineage holder in an ancient classical tantric education in a Kashmiri Shaivism tradition. Michaela is an in-demand renowned counselor and expert on relationships, intimacy, polarity and attraction, traveling the world, holding lectures, workshops, courses and retreats. Upon moving to the US in 1994, she established a 19-year counseling practice, logging over 40,000 client hours. She quickly became popular among her ongoing clients, including Oscar-winning actors, producers, writers, multiple Grammy-winning musicians, and international business founders. Included in her clinical experience, she co-founded a Malibu celebrity drug rehabilitation center, serving for 4 years as both a counselor and a treatment plan manager, subsequently consulting other facilities on treatment plans. Lately, she has been making available her unique services to those outside the Hollywood elite, offering women's workshop, couples intensives, co-ed trainings, intimacy intensives for both genders, as well as mentorships and relationship counseling. She's most accessible in California, London, and Amsterdam, where you can catch some of her regular events. Now, she's not published any books in English yet, but is currently finishing one that addresses the female approach in relationships. We have invited her to the forum today to converse about the masculine approach, as based on David Deida's revolutionary book, The Way of the Superior Man. But, as our female listeners soon will discover, this is highly relevant for both genders. Welcome to Forum Borealis, Michaela.
Yes, hello.
It's such a pleasure to have you with us.
Great. It's my first work day of the year, so you're the first order of the first work day of the year.
Great. That's perfect.
Yeah.
So this is actually the first part of a series we're going to have on sacred sexuality, on relationships, gender, polarity, all these things. So you will be first out.
Okay, great. I like that.
Cool. And like we mentioned before we started recording here, you mentioned it. You are our first female guest. Finally.
Well, I'm thrilled, and I'm definitely excited to be the first woman on the show.
It's such a match because considering the topic and everything, it's perfect.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And believe me, we've got some flack from listeners because, okay, in the beginning they have to cut us some slack, right?
Right.
But then we get guest after guest after guest. And I must say that it's kind of coincidental because we have, like, on our wish list, we have probably 30% women. And in our booking, we already have lined up at least 5 women for the next couple of months. And you were actually bumped up because I have to tell this too. We were going to have David Deida on. Unfortunately, he doesn't do interviews, so we were referred to you, who I understand you're the only one who is authorized to do his stuff?
Yes, I've been traveling and teaching with him for the last 13 years.
Wow.
And I've also co-taught with him the last 8 at my house. And I have a yoga studio at the house, or a retreat center at my house in California. And so we go way back. I've had, other training before then. But he hasn't been that public in recent years. We've been doing small private workshops at my house, and so that's I guess how I got here to begin with.
No, but I mean, it doesn't matter who we talk with as long as it's the contents, right? And and by the way, we also mentioned that you're actually European, which is kind of good too, because we want to balance between American and European guests.
Yes.
So, where are you from?
I am Austrian. Yeah, I straddle both, so to speak. I was born and raised in Austria, Salzburg, Austria. And I've lived in the States for the last 20 years, over 20 years now. So, but I consider myself very proudly European in many ways. And I do enjoy my California lifestyle at the same time. So, and as I'm traveling and teaching equally in Europe and in the US, I get to enjoy both, which is really lovely.
Now, you have an education into, is it psychology, sexuology?
I have all kinds of educations, as one should at my age. It's kind of it turned out very interesting because, as you probably know, when one starts out, it's not always clear where it goes. And I had a very, very strong urge from a very young age on, with 15, pretty much. I've told the story before somewhere in an interview. I really wanted to become a witch. That was my actual career goal. But, there's no formal education for witches in Austria, for 15-year-old witches.
No, you have to go to Scotland, to Hogwarts.
Exactly. And so because of that, I settled on actually medicine to begin with. I wanted to become a doctor. And that then, transformed into psychology. And I always figured that there must be a way to work with people dynamically that allows them to integrate the body, the mind, psychology, embodiment, and a certain kind of a shamanic dimension. But of course, you don't know where that goes when you're 15, 18, 20. So
indeed,
I started academically in the areas of psychology, but because I had such a strong, desire to be in the more metaphysical realm, so to speak, I found a woman, or actually, somebody sent me to a woman who did kind of Celtic herbal craft and things of that nature. And she took me under her wing and then sent me to another woman who was doing the same kind of work, I was told, in the Ayurvedic field. And that woman became my teacher. And she was actually from she was Kashmiri, and she was Indian, but from the Kashmir region. And she was actually one of the lineage holders, or the lineage holder of a tradition that's passed down through women.
Right.
And I was with her for almost 10 years, and, coming and going, but at times very, very intense every day for a while. And I moved to various cities in Germany to be close to her.
Oh, so this was in Germany?
Yeah, this was in Germany.
This reminds me of Elisabeth Heisch. She too hooked up with an Ayurvedic teacher. And for the listeners who don't know it, Ayurveda, that's an ancient kind of Indian alchemy thing. Medicine, alchemy, they describe it differently, Tantra. But I don't know if you know about Elisabeth Heisch.
I don't actually.
Oh, she wrote some books in the. I think she's from Hungary, the German part of Hungary. You should look into her.
I will. I feel bad that I have to say I don't know her.
Well,
I will remedy that. Well,
she's not that known any longer, but she used to. She published some books in the 50s, among else a book called Yoga and the Sexual Force. Mm-hmm. So she was a pioneer, not just because she wrote about these things, but she was also a woman in a time when it was a little unheard of for women, to do these things. So she's kind of a pioneer. But her main topic wasn't sexuality and relationships, but she also wrote on that. She has a very famous book called Initiation. So you will enjoy that.
Okay, I will absolutely get to that right after our conversation. That sounds fantastic.
That's great. And I wanted to get to your books, but I could only find one on the internet.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of finishing one and have a second one going. One of the things that has happened with me, which is something I most definitely can't complain about, I have been incredibly busy. There's lots and lots of recordings of mine out there, but I've been incredibly busy the last 10 years just traveling and teaching. And last year, particularly, I traveled almost 40 weeks out of the year. And so writing to me is kind of a very different space that takes a different kind of a headspace. So I've set it aside for a bit longer. I'm almost done with the book that
Great.
I'm going to have published this year. But for me, the topics that we're speaking about, and we'll get there in a moment, but they're very, very experiential in the body. There's only so much you can say about it written. That's not to say that I'm not going to try, but they're actually somatic experiences and somatic learning that makes it so you can apply, the whole principles of sexuality and, embodiment and feeling and union and intimacy. You can't armchair those. You can read about them all day long. You still have to, move them through your body and embody them with another human or with other humans. Not intimacy is something you can do with everyone, including your cat. So I've really put a very strong focus on traveling and teaching, and particularly teaching in Europe, where there wasn't a lot of offerings, of this kind. And it's been incredibly joyful. I've been going to Holland a lot and London, and really enjoying it because it's very, it's very fresh.
Yeah. Indeed.
Compared to California.
What is the book about?
This particular book is going to be called The Wild Woman's Way. And it is an exploration not only into women's practices and women's issues, but essentially the considerations of where we are in this particular moment in time around masculine and feminine development, around embodiment of the sacred feminine, sacred masculine, how that fits in with the workplace, with the fact that women these days, hold an incredible, strong, part of the workplace, and how that affects them physically, and how do you rewild yourself, meaning bring yourself back to the natural feeling, and how does that then look in relationship, in work, in your personal life. There'll be some very practical things. It's based on a curriculum I teach, which is called The Wild Woman's Way.
And you also have one book that I did find online called Just for Girls. Is that in the same...
That's actually not me.
That's not you?
No, that is not me. It's just my namesake, and it is a book. I have read it.
You have read it. It could be yours, considering the title.
Yes, it could be mine. That actually is funny that you say that now. It is not me, and I don't actually know the author, but I have the book because I always get asked that.
Right.
I've published quite a bit way back when in German, and that will come back out as well.
Okay.
And I have loads of audio and video courses. So we can talk about it.
I noticed it seems that your main focus so far has been on courses, workshops, stuff like that, right?
Yeah, that's kind of where my love lies, is being with people and still being with people in the flesh, in person. And I think, online stuff is really great, and I love it personally, but there is, for the areas of sexuality and intimacy, it still has to be body to body.
Yeah, I've been working myself in the field with retreats and stuff. So yeah, I fully agree. To do it physically, to meet up, nothing beats that.
No.
No matter how digital we become.
No, and particularly these days where everybody is more intimate with their cell phones and computers, the skills of openly and fully intimately relating with another human, not even sexually, just intimately,
anyway,
with eye contact, body to body, is a very needed reminder, very needed skill.
Just touching someone, is a big deal.
Yeah.
Now, well, one book that you can relate to is David's book, David Deida. Now, to people who don't know him, and he won't be introduced here because it's you, but let's give him a little shout out.
Yeah, I think it's important to speak about him because, he was kind of a cutting edge pioneer in his time when The Way of the Superior Man was written, which I believe was about 15 years ago. Like you said before we started the podcast, people would read these things and it would be such a revelation because nobody actually put it in these terms. Now, of course, he didn't invent it, but he condensed it and kind of systematized it and explained it in a way that was really, really amazing.
Yeah, I'll say he decoded it.
Yes, exactly. He just found a way to make it very relevant and make it very visceral and felt. And the subsequent teachings and people out here now, and there's lots and lots and lots of people teaching in the field of Tantra and sacred sexuality and sexual...
Yeah, and it's not gold, everything that glimmers.
Most definitely not, but then it's the same for people who do Zen retreats or, anything else either. So
the new this and that, I know.
And we can talk about that at some point.
Yeah.
But, coming back to David was, 15 years ago or so, the first person who really, like you said, decoded is a great word. And he wrote a book called The Way of the Superior Man, which speaks very clearly about the challenges that people face when they go into intimate relationship. Now, things have changed a lot since. It's no longer the climate and the culture it was 15 years ago, particularly not in Europe where, you live in Norway, so these Scandinavian countries particularly have gone very strongly into gender equality and...
but can I just interject that, and you'll continue with your reasoning here, but I have to say regarding that, because many people look to Scandinavia, the women have full rights.
Oh, yeah, I was going to...
You were probably going to address it.
I was going to...
Okay, you take it, yeah.
I was going to say things have changed, right? Things have changed, not always for the better, because... and I want to say this with brackets because, of course, for the better from a global citizen perspective, but from
and practically and materially and all that, yes.
Practically and materially, just from a human rights standpoint, and an equal opportunity standpoint, huge leaps and bounds have been made.
Yeah.
But of course, people's sexual essences and what they desire and how they want to relate in intimate relationship hasn't changed.
No.
These things are actually ancient. They're way, way older than written material or anything else. And it's important to make a big, big difference. And that's what the downfall is nowadays between masculine and feminine and men and women, because that is not the same.
No, because both, just to say that both genders have both principles within them. I mean, a man is feminine and masculine, and a woman is feminine and masculine.
Exactly.
And it's important for the listeners to understand that when you or me speak now about femininity and masculinity, we do address the principle behind gender,
Correct. We'll go there in detail because I think that's very important. But just wanted to go back to the Way of the Superior Man for a moment.
Yeah.
It was quite revolutionary back then. It's now spoken about widely, the masculine and feminine principles. But there's still a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of misconception.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of depth that can be mined when you go beyond the classic stereotyping, even of the sacred feminine, the sacred masculine. There's much more to it, and there's a in the last 5 years, I would say, I've seen a very big shift personally in work, when I work with people, in men particularly, so there has been a great evolution in that area that came from the initial women's culture, man's culture, then women's liberation, then man's liberation, the work of Robert Bly, things like that, the Mankind Project, David's work. And now we're actually going somewhere where the definitions of masculine and feminine can be used in the context of sexuality to give us, a much wider freedom and understanding of why we do the things we do. But, other things have changed to a point where we can be much more artistic and free with these principles and not use them again as kind of a form of oppression and suppression, which also happens, right? You hear people say, well, you're just not in your feminine right now, which is just another way to pigeonhole somebody or, put them in their place. Yeah. So, but coming back to the Way of the Superior Man, it was really the first book that spelled that out, and it's kind of the grandfather of all these books, and it's a fantastic book. I certainly remember that when I read it first, like you were describing before we recorded this, there was a great relief, a great kind of okay, here it is. And at that point when I had read the book, I already had received training in that particular area from my original teacher. And it was so relieving to hear both sides, because I had been trained by a woman and then I got to read it from a man. And so kind of my mission now is to add once again the woman's voice to that, which is why I'm also very excited about being the first woman on your show, because it's important that both voices are present.
Oh, yeah, indeed. But I have to say to that, when I read, actually this book, the book is still relevant. Yeah. You move around in, circles who are very into this, and those people have advanced, but, it's still a necessary book for most people. And for many people, I'm sure it will still be a revelation now.
Oh, absolutely. It's the prerequisite for any other exploration that people have.
Yeah, it's a good starting point, but it's also something you can work with your whole life. But let me say this about the book. I've been pining to say this ever since I got the idea that I have to have a show about this, and that is that this book is, and you will appreciate that, you listeners who are not too much into, should we say, this more airy-fairy metaphysical aspects of it, you will appreciate that this book is very practical. Now, it does contain the philosophy like we're talking about here, but it's very practical. It's like a working manual. And when I recommend this book, I think I've recommended it actually to more girls than boys, because the interesting thing is that if you read this book, you will not just learn about the masculinity and the man, you will also learn about the femininity and the woman. You just need to kind of reverse what you're reading. And I mean, for instance, chapter 2 called Dealing with Women, is a really good eye-opener to the feminine energy, so to speak. Mentioning, like, chapter 16 is called Women Are Not Liars. 17 is called Praise Her. 18 is called Tolerating Her Leads to Resenting Her. 19, Don't Analyze Your Woman. You know, I could go on, but here's so you can kind of learn. Of course, it's meant for the male approach, but don't you agree that you can learn just as much about the feminine as the masculine when you read this book?
I think that probably more women have read the book than men, and they've given it to men.
Yeah.
I absolutely think that you can learn a lot, right? Just from the dynamics. The dynamics is very interesting exploration that you can find yourself in. And you know, once again, though, it's important to understand that feminine and woman are not the same, right? And that is where a lot of people start going wrong. And, you know, I've been around David for so long, and we have, you know, we used to teach public workshops, and people would come and they would have read the book. And people, of course, take the book however it fits into their worldview. And so it has become a bit of an excuse sometimes for people to go, well, I'm just in my feminine translation. I can be crazy and abusive, and you must stand strong in my storm. And David will always be the first one to you know, tell people that if it's old stuff, it's not, you know, it's not the authentic, in the moment expression of the feminine. It's old stuff.
You mean like traumas, issues, stuff like that?
Traumas, issues, anything that's older than a couple of minutes, really. And that then takes some specific training to be able to be that responsive and quick in the coming and going of emotions. So, you know, man and woman and masculine and feminine need to be very clearly distinguished. And when you do, the book is amazing.
Yeah, but you see, for many, you know, women started very early, already in the 70s, with all sorts of self-realization, let's understand each other, having courses. In fact, it is a feminine thing to ponder the deeper stuff, to seek the above, so to speak, to center yourself. Males has been very slow.
You think so?
Yes, because males in the 70s and the 80s laughed of these self-realization things. I'm talking in general. But then came in the 90s, I guess, started the so-called pickup artist movement, the kind of, you know, how to get women. And it started as very primitive, but then that movement matured even. And I saw like a split where you have those who have focused on, I call it like, surgical robots, where they, you know, they only learn stuff. They're not working internally. They're only working externally. But another part of that movement started to shift into the same thing as David is talking about here. Connect with your masculinity. You know, find your, for instance, your purpose in life, which is very important for a man to become a man. We'll talk about this. So I see that it's maturing in them, and now it's more or less okay for males to go on retreats and workshops and learn about themselves. Yes,
that's why I was saying, do you still think so? Because I found, and this is what really I think is the update to, you know, to things, is that because men have been told for so long that they're unfeeling and, you know, they can't feel as deeply and they're, you know, and all of those kind of things. Many men, even men who are not spiritual or, you know, esoteric, have actually put quite a bit of effort into becoming more sensitive and becoming more aware and becoming more feeling and have a purpose. And I think that to me is what has really shifted when I teach men's groups, 6 and 9 months men's groups. And I have to say that the men who come to these groups are in a way more energetically and emotionally connected than some women who have gone hardcore into the workforce and into making it in the world. And I have such respect for these men and many men I meet. I work also privately with some very high performing people, actors and musicians, and the emotional intelligence that has been acquired in the last 10, 15 years by men is very beautiful in general.
Yeah.
You know, and that I think is a departure from the, like you said, the old days is, you know, that robot. We would always jokingly call it the data bot. You know, guys who came in and they learned the stance and, you know, the growling and, you know, this video. Every men's group has a video where the guys all go, ah! You know, and it's kind of like that's a stereotype too. That's a very big stereotype, and that's a stereotype that can't be, moved forward because there is so much more. And I find, and you said it right, out of the pickup artist movement came actually something that was quite beautiful, which was a different kind of empowerment for, for some men. Yeah, like you said, some guys just went with, okay, let me find a formula to get laid.
Yeah, that's how it started.
That's how it started.
But if you look at, for instance, David Deida, who is actually, I think it's through him I was aware of David Deida. Mm-hmm. He started to shift his courses, and it became more and more internally, more and more a self-development thing. Before he left that area, it kind of dovetailed very much with this stuff here.
Absolutely, yeah. And I know him personally, and he's exactly what we were just talking about. He very much got in touch with the parts of him that were very feeling and very emotionally intelligent, and he's the very proud and very involved, beautiful father to a daughter, and it's a very strong evolution that came with a certain kind of empowerment of men. It's a very controversial subject. I don't know if you want to go there to begin with, but I'm happy to go there if need be. The whole empowerment.
Well, I'll tell you where I want to go. Have you been in Norway, by the way?
I have. I love Norway, and I have a very deep love for the Scandinavian countries. My grandfather worked in the Scandinavian countries for many years and would take me as a child. And as long,
But have you been here in your adult life?
Yes, I have. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I make sure every couple of years I go.
Okay, cool. But I'll not say what I'll say now is not so flattering about Norway, and that is that this is a stereotype, but it is a tendency. Here, I don't know about America or wherever, but here it's become a little crisis because many males have become so out of touch. Like you say, yes, they're in touch with their femininity and stuff, but they become more feminine often in some ways than the girls. And the girls are forced to become masculine. Now, they handle that very well, because if you grow up as a girl in Norway, you wear pants. I mean, you can do everything. You're premiered, you're stimulated, you're rewarded if you do everything a boy do. So from they're very small, it's okay for them to connect with the masculinity as well as the femininity. Whereas the boys are kind of punished for the masculinity, and their masculine ideals are very primitive and dark, not very positive masculine ideals. So what we have is a crisis where many males, they can't get any girls, to be quite blunt. Mm-hmm. And girls, even though they appreciate these qualities in men, if they are friends or whatever, they need a man's man. Right. So that means that there's a lot of sexually frustrated men.
Yes.
And also lots of sexually frustrated women. Because
I was going to say, and lots of hard sexually frustrated women.
Yeah, because the man can't deliver.
Yeah.
So right now, what I see in this area is that Maybe, because we had this sexual revolution in the 60s, we had the feminists, we had the hippies, we had all that. Now, men have to learn how to be men again, and women have to not learn how to be women, but feel that it's okay for them to sometimes be a woman.
Right.
You see what I mean?
I know what you mean. That's all I do every day, it seems.
Excellent. That's why we're talking with you. So that's your cue.
Oh. I would phrase it differently, though.
Okay.
You don't have to learn to be a man, and you don't have to learn to be a woman. You have to relax into what you already are.
Right.
It's a relaxation and the coming back and the rewilding or rehoming, however you want to what's naturally there. The real danger in all of these attempts to reclaim the sacred masculine, the sacred feminine, is that often that is just another layer of pretense put on top of other layers of pretense. So one way of saying that is when you were born and you are born with a masculine essence, and you're born as a man, right? But some men have feminine essences, and that's a separate issue which we can go into. But if you're a man with a masculine essence, you are born specifically with a built-in. This is kind of evolutionary. This has nothing to do with psychology.
Sure.
You're born with a built-in urge to have a direction, to go places, to push boundaries. And how little boys do that, of course, is by fighting, by climbing on things, by being loud, by being what is deemed by their mothers often violent, and all of those things. And so,
or constructing, it can be mental too.
Exactly.
Inventing.
It could be non-violent, but it's exactly constructing things and doing things that go places, so to speak, emotionally, physically.
Yeah, push the borders.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And little boys always want to be right on the edge of something going wrong, right? And right on the edge of falling, and then they fall. And that's how masculine men grow. And of course, there's exceptions to all of this, but that's in general. So of course, when that is not encouraged, or when it's actively discouraged, you have a real problem, because you are essentially never getting to live out your natural essence. And then let's say, this happens a lot, men being raised by their mothers at home, of course. And then it's like, no, don't kick, don't fight, be harmonious, don't be loud, behave properly. So they hear all of that. But then also they hear, don't cry, don't be like a girl. There's all kinds of things that happen early on that make it so that particular essence might not be developed that fully. So then, and there's also, then relating to women, things happen. But so then those men put on a layer of behavior that is not natural, but that gets them love. Because you want to be loved by your mother.
Pleasing.
Right? And you would be pleasing, right? It's the oldest thing. And when women don't know that forcing their boys to please them sets them up for very bad relationship, which they don't know, right? They just want their children to be good humans and good citizens and, not be violent and not be rapists. And people don't set out to do wrong things. It just happens that suppressing of that forward urge forces the little boy then to put on a kind of a layer of, now he needs to be quiet and sensitive perhaps, and sensitive to energy, and behave properly and cooperate, and all of those are good skills, but they're not connected to his natural essence. Then, of course, he wants to find a woman, and most women, I'm making very gross black and white description.
Yeah, we have to. It is for educational purposes.
You have to give me some artistic license, right? But so then most women want a bit of a bad boy, right? Like you said, they want a real man. So then the guy who's just learned that spanking a woman or talking dirty to a woman or being aggressive is wrong, because that's what his mother said, in subtle or not so subtle ways, puts on a fake layer of I'm the bad boy, I'm like the me, and so on. Then comes the next layer and the next layer. So it's important that when we talk about being a man or becoming a woman or being with the masculine and feminine, we kind of relax all these contractions and layers of mechanisms that we've put on to get love. And come back to what is naturally our birthright. Our body knows. Our psyche knows, right? If you are doing the activities that are naturally yours, and they're not the same for every man. Not every man needs to do martial arts and meditation. There's many other. For some men, it's much more in the creative domains or the music domains or nature.
Yeah. Couldn't we say to any man that find your masculinity?
Exactly. And that's the important piece. Relax into who you are already, right? Relax into who you are already. And the same is true for women, because women, are conditioned to have to be certain things from a very, very early age on. And if you're, born in this time and day as a woman, you were essentially now in the Western world taught that you have to be smart and, assertive and find your way. And like you said, women in Scandinavian countries are essentially massaged into being able to do anything they want, which is fantastic. But doing everything you want comes with a huge price, because doing everything isn't that healthy or that good. And so there again, it's the relaxation. It's not going to yet another course so that you learn something else that makes you better because you don't think you're good enough. It's realizing your innate goodness and the innate depth of your always already there masculine or feminine.
The women here are... They have no problem getting laid, but they are very frustrated when it comes to find a partner, because either they choose the bad boy, who they feel sexual attraction to, or they try to find the successful man. Now, when most of the women, in the olden days, women were dependent on males, so it wasn't hard to look up to a male in some instances if he had something, that could put him ahead of the pack, so to speak. But today you have a lot of beautiful, successful, intelligent, independent, wealthy, self-realized women.
Yes.
And they just can't find a partner. Now for the men, it's the opposite. They can't get laid.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Right?
You understand immediately why this is a problem.
I totally understand. Well, it is a problem simply because, it's a problem for many reasons, but it's a problem because it could be remedied very easily, but people don't know how to, right?
And I think it's very much a male responsibility. Maybe I'm being unfair here, but I think...
You think it is?
Males have the keys. I think that if we pull ourselves together, if we learn about these things and we learn about ourselves and we just become males again, I think the women will kind of fall in place, so to speak.
You are absolutely right. That's not a very politically correct statement, but you're absolutely right. And this is
it's an observation for what it's worth.
It is an observation, and I want to put a caveat on here because you are right. But there's a bigger principle that makes that right? And the bigger principle is that if I've started taking my teaching out of the realm of masculine and feminine simply because it's so fraught with misunderstanding these days. But if you feel for a moment that between a man and a woman in an intimate relationship, there can only be one of each. Right. So in the coupling, right, within yourself, you have both. You have masculine and feminine, and I'll call them something else in a moment, which will make sense. But you have masculine, feminine within yourself. Your masculine is the part of you that provides direction, that follows a schedule, that has a bigger picture, that likes to push the edge. That's true for me as well. I have a very well-developed masculine, and I'm really good with schedules and things like that. That's my masculine.
Yeah, and according to Jung, the older women and men become, the more they drift over to the opposite polarity.
Exactly. Well, yes, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But I think it's innate in both human being, in both men and women, to have both. And being trained well to do both makes you a highly functioning human being. The people I work with a few Hollywood actors and actresses, like A-list actors and actresses, and a few very well-known bands and musicians. People I work with, their masculine and feminine are equally developed. They have a preference sexually, strongly, very strongly actually, but they are capable of both being very disciplined, very on purpose, on the edge, and wildly feeling chaotic and creative. And so I think high performance individuals have it both. But for the sexual occasion, one person is the taker or ravisher, and one person is the surrendered or ravishee.
Yeah, but does it have to be the same person all the time at all areas?
No, not at all. That's exactly. It can't change.
Exactly.
That's why I'm saying certain concepts have to be refined, because no, not at all. It could go both ways each way, but each time, and from moment to moment, from sexual occasion to sexual occasion, could completely shift back and forth.
But not at the same time, at the same area. Then we collide.
Not at the same time, at the same area, then that's right. So if we just talk about the sexual thing, because you're saying men can get laid, women can't get a good man, which is true. So the important piece to feel here, and you were saying that men are responsible for that, and they are, and the reason they are is not because guys should be doing all the work and women are so perfect, but because the principle of masculine and feminine could also be explained, and this is how I explain it these days, as the organizing principle and the pleasure principle. And so when you feel that, then you can feel that in a sexual or, quasi-sexual, meaning an intimate relationship interaction, both of these principles have to be present.
Yeah.
And so the organizing principle is the principle that aligns the pleasure principle. The pleasure principle by itself, right, the feminine by itself, is just all over the place, sloppy, eating cake and, making crumbs in bed and being chaotic and not knowing where it's going and not getting up on time and not paying the bills. And, but it's very pleasurable and light-filled and enjoyable and full, and there's children and animals and whatever. That's the pleasure.
And very, very in the now.
Very in the now.
Present.
Exactly. So the organizing principle then essentially aligns, or you could say pins, the pleasure principle into a direction, or into kind of a, into a flow that goes somewhere. So it's not just a wild puddle. It gets corralled into a river that flows somewhere. Within the banks of the organizing principle, the river, the pleasure principle can be completely wild, but the edges are held. So when in a relationship, the man is the more masculine or holding the organizing principle, the woman, I have a wild dog pack suddenly.
I hear the pack is awaiting.
I have 7 dogs, so
wow.
So the pleasure principle gets aligned by the organizing principle. Could go both ways. Could be the man, could be the woman. But for most heterosexual couples, often the man likes to be the one doing the organizing principle for not all the time, but most of the time. And the woman likes to be in the pleasure principle and be relaxed and open and flowing.
Except that in the center domain, which is a feminine thing, to find the center.
Yes.
The woman is the organizer. And outside of that, in the external world,
exactly,
traditionally, it's the man.
Right. But sexually speaking, whoever does the penetrating is the organizing principle, right? And if you're heterosexual and you like the interaction to be that you're with a real man as a woman, so to speak, who doesn't tolerate a whole lot of the complication in that particular moment, but pins, right? Women always have these fantasies. Now, 50 Shades of Grey was the best-selling book ever. And what is it? It's a cheap, and when I'm saying cheap, an incomplete offering of the pin, right? Of the pinning down of the organizing principle.
Don't you find it interesting that it's a female author?
Well, yeah, I don't know if it's...
You see the same in the classic called The Story of O, which is kind of the same subject.
Right, exactly, yes.
But it's much better written because...
yes.
But we don't have to go into that. But you see, that is too a woman who wrote. And just to complete this reasoning, if you observe some classical books on sexuality within esoterica, you find that even though there's like 90% male authors, I see that those who write about sexuality and relationships in an esoteric, Western esoteric metaphysical aspect are women.
Of course.
Like Dion Fortune. So this is interesting. This is very interesting. Could you explain that for us?
Well, it's the woman's, right? I mean, we're just going to say woman and man now, but taking into account that some women are in fact masculine in their essence, but many are not. So, and all of these things can be applied the other way around too. But so the feeling is a bit let me explain this so that this makes sense. When you are a woman and you do all the things that most women do these days, which is, still have children and take care of them and raise them, then go to work, make decisions, call the shots. Like you said, there's lots of beautiful, successful, well-actualized women out there who've done nothing but given themselves the organizing principle, right? They have organized their lives around achieving and around making money and around being beautiful and attractive and well-read and
explore their orgasm with all kinds of gizmos.
All kinds of things. So that's them husbanding themselves, so to speak, boyfriending themselves, fucking themselves would be another way of saying it, right?
Yeah, or dating their own animus instead of a man.
Exactly. And so what that does is that comes from feeling that no one outside of ourselves can do it as good as we can. And that has sadly become very true, which is what you're talking about, because the men have been forced into, and the men through these actions have been forced into the kind of behavior that doesn't make them very trustworthy anymore.
Castrates.
And and they're just, oh, honey, whatever you want. And then she goes, well, this is what I want. So she is the organizing principle, which through the laws of polarity, right, the laws of sexual attraction mean that any man who is with her will then have to assume the pleasure principle. So you have women with incredibly tight run schedules and men who lay on the sofa and enjoy themselves or out in nature or doing drugs or whatever, playing music.
Playing computer games, big problem among the young.
Playing computer games, right? They're doing the things that are within the pleasure principle. And the women are doing the things that are within the organizing principle, because for a woman's body and for a woman's kind of psyche, a certain kind of a safety or a container is very important. Yeah. So coming back to the 50 Shades of Grey, what we long for, this includes me, what we long for is to be released from the tension of having to do it all ourselves. Right? That's really what we long for so deeply, because we intuit that surrender, right? Surrender into somebody else's organizing principle, surrender into somebody else's penetration physically, but also just by knowing where it's going, releases us from that tension of holding it all together.
And I must inject here, and sexually, because much of the sexual frustration I observe that women have with men today is because they can't trust him, and because he's grown up thinking I have to trick her to get what I want.
Exactly.
So she cannot relax, like you said, surrender.
Yes.
Now, ironically, if she surrendered, she would achieve the orgasm, but how can she? Because she has to take responsibility because he takes no responsibility.
Exactly.
This is the trap we're all falling into.
Exactly. That is exactly the trap we're in. So, and she also thinks that he's not as good as she is at it, which he's probably right. Not always, right? And the tension of being in control becomes habitual, right? It becomes kind of an addiction. Now women can no longer let go even though they want to, but their bodies and their minds are programmed to stay in control. So, then they have to go and do workshops on how to have an orgasm and things like that. When if relaxation would occur, that would happen naturally.
Yeah.
Right? So, but it's a two-way street because, of course, if she can't trust somebody to take her these places, then she can't actually release fully. And the trap, sadly, and this is why we come back to why is it the man's responsibility, the trap is that if you can release yourself, it's not a complete release. There is ways to release yourself completely, but when you have to organize your own release, there's always a part of you that has one foot out the door as a woman, right? And keeping an eye on things. So we do need a man to, so to speak, obliterate us, to press into us, to pin us. And sexually speaking, now this doesn't mean you have to surrender your life or your direction in business or the children or anything. Just sexually speaking, that the surrender can only happen when the safety is there, the trust is there, and the penetration is deeper than our own. So cut to 50 Shades of Grey. Mm-hmm. And other, like you said, other women writing, and even in the more mystical traditions, in the tradition I was raised to begin with, there's a very strong emphasis placed on it's a female lineage, but in that female lineage, there is an initiator, there's a man that initiates, right? That does the final transmission through the releasing of the female practitioner into not only bodily bliss but also knowledge, right? That it's a very beautiful alchemical shamanic kind of a process when that happens, and how that looks then in the McDonald's pop culture kind of a way is 50 Shades of Grey. It's a description of a man being powerful, right, which is equated with trust, wealthy, which is equated with the ability to be trustworthy, right, and have a purpose and a direction. Why money is important in the Christian Grey world and in many women's world is it signifies a man's ability to stay with it, follow through.
Yeah, it's a symbol.
It's a symbol. And it signifies safety. It signifies the ability to make something happen, to have a direction, to have a purpose.
Yeah.
Power, right? So the ability to have a direction and a purpose generates the trust that then in the 50 Shades of Grey gets translated into allowing herself to be tied up. Now, why tying up so interesting to people or to women is because it removes you from the necessity to do something. And when you do something every day, all day, constantly, the fact that you can't do something, and that even if you struggle, so to speak, within the consent, of course, right? With, no, I still have to make some phone calls, but no, you're in shackles, so to speak, right? You're told what to do. You are made to submit lovingly, of course, right? This isn't some nasty, do as I say.
No, we're talking principally and philosophically.
Principally, yes.
And sexually. But all these disclaimers you're coming with are unfortunately also required because there's so many.
They are very required.
And get it males who don't get it.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, once again, also females. I mean, there's a lot of women who like to be handled very roughly because it numbs them, right? It allows.
Yes, but my point is that a female seeing the film or reading the book, she doesn't go out and, I mean, a man who doesn't get it, he could go out and, try forcing himself upon a woman because he doesn't get it. So
exactly, but women go out and they trust the wrong man. They surrender to weak men or to bad men, or psychos, because any taste of this is better than nothing, right? So it goes both ways.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
But what's so important and why women are writing this, and is that what you have to understand about a woman's body is that a woman's body through evolution learns through resonance. It learns through assimilation. So, when I do women's workshops, we always in the beginning sit together in a big circle, and you can feel in a very short period of time that circle coalesces and it almost pulses together, because women's bodies will synchronize not only in menstruation, but also just in the way they breathe and the way they feel each other. Yeah. And so we learn through feeling other women and seeing other women and hearing other women. So when somebody is writing about these things and writing about the release and writing about surrender and writing about being guided by a man way deeper than she can guide herself, every woman who reads that can feel that in her body. It's like a transmission. And so one of the reasons why 50 Shades of Grey, and I grew up with the story of O, which I found in a drawer somewhere at my parents' house, and at a probably younger age than I should have, and loved it for that exact reason. Back then, and I was.
But that book, I must add, is so much deeper than 50 Shades because it contains actually a mystery drama. Mm-hmm. And that's the amazing part.
It does, indeed. It does. That's why I'm saying 50 Shades of Grey is the bubblegum McDonald's version of the story of O, while the story of O is a good 6-course French meal.
And the story of O don't have one dirty word in it.
No, because it doesn't have to.
It's so indirect.
It's so subtle, right? But so strong. And
10 times more brutal and raw than 50 Shades.
Yes, because it deals with actual surrender, not the bubblegum version of it, right? And without getting too new agey or woo-woo, the reason why surrender feels so good is that at the end of that tunnel, so to speak, is God, right? However you understand God, is the divine, is that moment of oneness with everything, which we, yearn for so very deeply. And so where sexuality and sexual yoga and masculine and feminine become a much deeper exploration, like you said, the story of O is a mystery, right? That whole area is a mystery. It can't be completely explained. It has ever deepening layers, right? Once you can be a good lover, once, let's say, you no longer come in 3 minutes, then the next door opens, and then, you think you've achieved something there, and now the next door opens and the next door opens. And it's an endless, it's like these endless mirrors where you see, back and forth in this mirror. And it's incredibly beautiful, and it's it's a mystery, right? It's the human mystery played out in a man and a woman, in a union, and then the pulling apart again into the two different principles, and then the coming back and merging, and so it's easy to cheapen it down to, women are this and men are this, but the deeper layer of the 50 Shades of Grey, or the story of O, is the surrender to the divine, right? The surrender to the organizing principle that frees a woman. And then on the man's side, the having that purpose, the having the direction, the being able to penetrate that deeply is hugely empowering, beautifully empowering. A man who knows where he's going. And the most important thing, we haven't spoken about this yet, is the most important thing is a man who no longer needs to please his mother, in each woman he meets, is incredibly attractive and sexy. But that's where the trouble lies, right? When women don't trust their men and then they start demanding things and schooling them and telling them what to do. It's where relationships break down. One thing that we didn't talk about is, I've been a relationship counselor for 22 years. I've spent the first 20 years in the US seeing clients pretty much every hour on the hour, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And then, eventually started teaching on the weekends. And then my schedule now is not like that anymore.
But are you still open for being booked and stuff?
Yeah. I still work with clients, and I still use that knowledge gained in 20 years of counseling couples and working with people individually on relationship areas for what I teach, because it's the same story over and over and over and over, which is the moment a woman tells a man what to do, she is the one penetrating, so to speak. And now he's in a really, really difficult position, because if he does what she tells him to do, he's become her bitch, so to speak. To say that.
Or her son.
Or her son. That was the second thing I was going to say.
Oh, okay.
Her bitch or her little boy, right?
Yeah.
So those are the only two options. If he's not doing what she's saying, then he's just some asshole who is difficult.
Yeah, he's contrary, which is also a kind of drama thing, which is, it's not very masculine.
Exactly. Yeah. No. And so it presents men with a real issue, because on one end you want to, nobody sets out to agonize your partner, but if you do, and this is where the woman's role in the changing of these dynamics come in, right? It's not all the men. It is the men, but it's not all the men. Because if a woman knows that she sets her man up to failure when she tells him what to do, because if he does what she tells him to do, she no longer respects him sexually.
Let me just interject. More colloquially speaking, this is what people refer to as shit tests.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yes.
Women giving the man shit to see how he deals with it.
Exactly. And if he deals with it by...
Subconsciously often.
Well, we are built for that, because that's how we stay safe. Right? We're constantly making sure that you can still keep your shit together.
Yeah, it's biological.
So that
even.
you're all safe. It's biological. It has nothing to do with psychology. It's just...
No.
Can you be trusted? But it's a setup when it comes in the form of, I need you to do this. Then if he does it, he's now her little boy. And if he doesn't do it, then he's an asshole or contrary or whatever else there is. So the first and foremost and just most important thing a man can do for himself is to come to terms with the fact that pleasing a woman isn't actually possible.
No, because it's a never-ending road.
There's a never-ending road.
The goalpost is moved.
Always.
You think you're at the top of the hill. Oh my God, there's a new hill behind there.
Exactly. And because we're bottomless,
yes.
Right?
Fortunately.
And that bottomlessness is a trap, right?
But it's not just a trap. I mean, it's the universe. It is the universe. It's eternity.
But the universe is a trap, right?
I get it, yes.
And so the thing to feel, and the thing that is the most important, and that to me is the new man's movement, beyond even the way of the superior man and anything that has come. But the new man's movement is men finding a center within themselves where they don't have to please anyone.
Yes.
Right? And meaning anyone outside that makes a demand.
Hang on, are you referring to this movement about men going their own way, or whatever it's called? These guys who boycott women?
No, I don't know anything about that. What I'm talking about is in relationship, what makes a man incredibly trustworthy is when he is on his path and he can't be swayed. Yes. Right? So if my husband right now, is traveling as he does most of the year. And he's traveling for work. And if my husband travels for work and he has this very specific agenda for the last year, he went through a bit of he had some physical issues. And so he's out of them for a year, and he really set himself a very strong goal. And that goal requires that he travels a lot and that he spends a lot of time doing what he needs to be doing. If I can distract him from that by complaining that he's not contributing in the household, or he's not here, or he's leaving me with extra work, and he stops and just does what I say so that I'm not upset, I cannot trust him that he's actually pursuing his life and his goal. Right? But if he just ignores me, I'm going to go, well, you don't even care about the relationship or the house or the animals or anything like that.
It's a magical balance, isn't it?
It's a magical balance. And the balance, and this is what I mean with being on his own free man. What I need from my husband, and what women report they want from their man, is that he makes a decision based on other considerations than just trying to shut me up or please me.
Yeah.
He makes a consideration based on his path, where he's going, what the relationship is all about, what's best for everyone involved. And he might say no, knowing that I will get very mad, but he can stay with it because he has the integrity within himself.
When I discovered coincidentally how extremely powerful it is to say no to a woman.
Absolutely. That's what I'm talking about.
I mean, I was shocked because it was just a very trivial thing. It was just about hanging up a poster, and we had 4 hands on that poster. 2 of them are mine, and she said, "This is a very good place to hang it." And I took the poster and I moved it out of her hands and up to another area, and I said, "No, this is the area to hang it." And this is the first time I realized this. After that, she was like a puppy. The whole day she was dancing around me, craving my attention. And I had to analyze it until I realized what had happened. That little detail. Bam.
Yeah, exactly. So what that is she pushed against you, you held your ground.
Yeah.
And she could relax because she knew that you knew what you were doing.
But I didn't hold my ground to be contrary or to impress her.
Because it was the right thing to do.
Yes, it was sincere.
Exactly.
I said, no, this is objectively the best place to hang it.
Yes.
So let's hang it there.
Yes, exactly. That's the thing. You can't have your ego involved.
No.
You can't be just, it's my way or the highway, right?
Exactly. That's the psychopath.
Exactly. It has to be within what I'm talking about, you being a freestanding man, making your own decisions without being afraid of the punishment or the nagging or the upset.
Yeah.
When you are free, when you're not just doing it because you wanted to shut up or you want it your way, when you're free in your expression, it is incredibly calming. It is so wonderful. There's no way to describe this to a man, really. You have to see it, and you saw it, right?
Yeah.
The deep relaxation and the happiness that comes into a woman's body when there's a firm boundary provided that she can relax against. Now, it might turn out when you start saying no in the bigger picture in a relationship that maybe you're not aligned, and then the relationship must end, right? Because if you've been the mommy's boy and the people's pleaser and you're just doing what she tells you to do, and one day you find the strength to go, no, that's actually not in anybody's best interest. Right? One of the things that happens a lot is that women become quite addicted to their schedules and their calendar because it's a substitute for the penetration. And so it's like, no, let me just do this one more thing. Let me just, you don't understand. I have this much to do. You need to wait. I need to do this. And then you get into a bit of a martyr thing where it takes on a life of its own. Right? If a man then goes, okay, she's going to get mad if I say something, and he supports that, he's making it worse. But if he can feel something like, wow, this is not good for her. She needs to stop. She's way beyond in her stress level and her body. And then you set a firm boundary, not because you are annoyed by her, but because it's much better for everyone involved if she stops now, then you stop her.
When you say that you used yourself as an example with your husband, he's out traveling and stuff, it reminds me also of what Esther Perel said, you know, this Italian...
I know who she is, yeah. I just heard her speak. We were on a ship in the Caribbean speaking at the same summit, and so I just recently heard her.
Yeah, we're going to interview her too. And she has a very good sentence, slogan. It goes like this. Love seeks closeness, but desire needs space to thrive.
Yeah.
And this is the paradox that I think contributes to ruin so many relationships.
Right.
People can't manage that. In the beginning, it's so exciting. Oh, we just find each other. We don't know each other. It's a little forbidden. There's tension. There's a high sexual activity, but there's not necessarily so much developed love, because I don't really look at infatuation as real love. It's a spark. But then, you know, fast forward 5 years or something, and we know everything about each other, and we're very close. But somehow the excitement, the 50 Shades. She dreams of 50 Shades. He dreams of, I don't know, so porn movie. And neither of them, you know, this I think is also connected to the masculine and feminine.
It is. I say it a bit different than Esther Perel, but it's the exact same concept.
Yeah, let's hear your version.
So how I look at this is that there's different aspects to the interaction, right? So there is relationship, and relationship is always built on sameness. So the more you have in common, the better your relationship. And what that means is that if you meet someone and you share, you know, common interests, friends, education, love for animals, whatever, right? The sameness makes for the relationship. Even in a working relationship, you work in the same place, and that's what makes the relationship.
Or friends.
Or friends, exactly. So relationship is always built on having things in common. So it's coming as close together and having as many things together as possible. Polarity requires maximum separation, because polarity is the science of positive and negative, dark and light, masculine and feminine, right? Opposite poles. And the further the poles apart, the greater the arc of attraction, the spark of attraction. So people go opposite attract sexually, right? And like and like makes for a good loving relationship. So in one of my, actually that talk on that ship, I was saying that when people say things like, oh, I married my best friend, what that usually means they no longer have sex.
Yeah.
Right? There was a great laughter in the audience there because I explained that exact principle. Because polarity is based on the two people in the relationship for the sake of sex being very, very different. And so that would mean one person is extremely pleasure-driven, feminine. One person is extremely purpose-driven, masculine. And when those two people have that space between them by the difference, there's a strong arc of sexuality, which is why it's always great in the beginning, and which it's often really sexy with people who you don't really like, because it's the polarity. Now, the good news is polarity can be learned. All I do is essentially travel around and teach people how to have polarity. But polarity can be learned. You can train your body to assume the posture of the feminine, so to speak, to assume the posture of the masculine, to make your bodies very different. And then polarity is it's like magic. It just happens. And I think one of the most rewarding things is, sometimes I work with people who've been married for 20 years, and you teach them these principles, and suddenly they have these hot sex lives like teenagers. But it's much harder to find somebody with whom to have good relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, than good sex.
Than good sex, right?
Yeah.
So love you can't learn. Love and that sameness and that connection that you can't learn, that happens. That's by the grace, of what your life is about, that you find somebody with whom you can sink in and connect and spend your life with. Sexual polarity is a learnable skill. Now, we don't learn it because we're not educated in those realms. Other mystery schools and traditions do teach sex for that sake. It's just a skill like playing tennis or, anything else. But so where people make the mistake is that they get to know each other. It's very exciting. They have a great sexual spark because they don't know each other that well. You often hear people say, women particularly have said to me, God, he makes me feel like a girl. I'm like so excited and soft and the guy goes, oh, I feel like a man. She's so responsive to me and it's amazing and they have great sex. And then what happens is you want to spend more and more and more and more and more time together. And, you become closer and closer and closer, and it's like magnets rubbing off, right? When you rub a North and a South Pole together long enough, they lose their charge. And so people become more and more close, and they move in together. Then they're on the sofa. They're always touching. They're talking about everything at all times. There's no more distance.
Yeah.
And then they lost the sexual charge. They might be deeply loving, or not, right? Then there's resentment and all other kinds of stuff that kicks in. That's more of the psychological nature.
If it's been poisoned, yes.
And it's been poisoned, the relational dynamics. In any relationship, there's man, there's the woman, or two women, two men. And then there's the relationship as a third entity.
Yeah.
But aside from that, the loving part and the connection and sameness part sustains people, but they don't know how to recreate that sexual polarity. And that's where the man needs to be manly and the woman needs to be womanly comes in, not as a stereotype, but just because when sexual interaction happens, there have to be differences. And also there can only be one hard person, one soft person, one penetrator, one penetratee. It could go back and forth. You can shift it, but there can only be one of each.
Yeah. Right. Well, in the ancient traditions, they refer to these. They say that there's basically two. Well, you can, like one of my teachers said, he said you can divide a cake into as many bits as you want, but it's still the same cake. But let's say we divide it into 4 bits. Then you have 2 feminine archetypes and 2 masculine. Now, the 2 feminine would be what they refer to as earth, which is the sensational aspects of the feminine, what you said, to enjoy, to perceive, to be in the moment, to appreciate your senses. Then there's the water aspect, which is the emotions, the ocean, the ebb and flow, the waves. Then you have the 2 masculine archetypes, and of course we all have this, both gender have all these 4 in them. You have the mentality, which is air, which is the arranging principle, the analyzing, the organizing, the intelligence, the understanding. And then you have the fire, which is the last masculine, which is the will, or the intuition, the creation, to action. No, interesting thing is that women, when they're born, they have a kind of inherent, intelligent understanding of water and earth.
Yes.
And they are attracted to fire and air because they want to explore it. And at some point, usually midlife, they start to handle it, master it. It may be before, it may never be, but So what I said earlier in our conversation, that females shift over to they can start to identify. This is what Jung also described with, the animus and anima concept. We don't have time to get into that today. So, and the males, they often have to then learn to appreciate the water and the earth. To, not just career, not just materialism, money, whatever. Now they have to start to accept emotions as an important thing, like Deida talks about here, to understand the emotions. and to appreciate them, and also to, be present, and just like the woman has to get her sensation arranged, her enjoyment organized, the man has to learn to stop and appreciate that, and to feel and to be present. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's a part of this polarization. Only the ancients used more symbolic and more magical descriptions for this.
Yes, but the descriptions are accurate in the way that our bodies relate to it, right? And I think it's quite beautiful I've never heard it said the way you just said it, but it makes a lot of sense in the elemental nature of it. And the important piece there again, and I think this is very important always, is that there has to be a certain kind of love and respect and reverence for the differences, right? And for the different expressions that come through the emotions versus the mind. And it's become a little bit, at least in the States, it has become a little bit like almost a tool of suppression, right? That the women are down on the man's intellects and making fun of how narrow-minded they are, and and things like that. And I think it's very important to understand that all elements are needed, right? And all elements need to be integrated, and it's actually
unbalanced, actually.
And it's actually a gift. I'm going to speak about myself again to not put these words into anybody else's mouth, but I'm 48 and I've pretty much achieved most of what I wanted to achieve career-wise. As far as the things that I was able to do, the places I was able to travel, the incredible privilege I have teaching worldwide, meeting people everywhere. And so teaching, of course, is a very directed, penetrative kind of a activity. So I definitely spend a lot of my time in the mind and doing domain. And then I get to go home, and I live on a farm in California with, as you heard, many, many dogs, and donkeys and horses, and I grow avocados, and I have a sustainable vegetable garden, and my own well water, and beautiful fruit, and an incredible environment. So then I get to be with the earth, and I get to be with the water, and I get to sink into that, and have it both, have the deep, strong feeling and have the ability to wield, let's say, power in the world. And one isn't better than the other. One isn't worse than the other. And it's important to not make these categorizations of, oh, you shouldn't be in your masculine, or you're too fiery. It's a matter of welcoming and embracing it all so that it can be used like an instrument.
Yeah, and I'd venture that if you would be too airy or watery or fiery, the solution isn't to quench and suppress what you got too much of. It is to find what you got too little of and boost that.
That's exactly right. And there we come back to where we started out talking about the herbal and Ayurvedic principles, or the principles of Taoism, or Chinese medicine. That's exactly what you do. You bring up and further and coax the element that is suppressed, and not kill off the other elements. And that, taking that as a metaphor for relationship, I think it's very important. This brings us back to granting everybody their pieces to support all the pieces, and bring up the ones that are missing for the optimal relational and sexual interaction, and not squish the other ones or make them bad.
It's interesting, people listening to us now, they will follow our philosophical talk, but I think that if you have a very deep understanding of the principles of the genders, I always begin there. I always recommend people to begin there, to understand the principle of masculinity and femininity, because if you do that, then you don't even need to read. You can meditate or ponder or explore or experience yourself into understanding these things, because everything because everything that follows from the beginning is kind of logical. I'll suggest just a very simple exercise to the readers, and that everybody knows the symbol of Mars and Venus. Now, if you look at Mars, you have the circle and the arrow that grows out of the circle. Now, to understand masculinity, all you have to do is just put that arrow into the circle. And what do you have? Yeah, you have an arrow that wants to break out of the border, of the limit. Like you talked about earlier today, you said the masculine wants to expand, it wants to go beyond the horizon, to the borders. Classical expansion, explosive, it's centrifugal. That's the masculine energy in a nutshell, in both of us. Mm-hmm. Then you have the Venus symbol, which is a circle and a cross under the circle. Now bring that cross into the circle, just like you did with the arrow. And you have actually a very old symbol called rota, but you have then a cross in a circle. You have the middle point, which is what the feminine seeks. It seeks to center stuff. It seeks to collect it together. It seeks to balance. It seeks the centripetal, the implosion rather than the explosion. And I think the 4 elements we talked about and the 2 genders we talk about, we all have to balance. I know it sounds like a cliche, a new age cliche, but it has very practical ramifications when you understand it and go into it. Mm-hmm. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it differently, but it's beautifully said. The way I describe it and feel it for myself very strongly is that the masculine principle in both men and women, but, in general, most men are more masculinely based, is emptiness. Right? It's complete emptiness. It's going towards emptiness, going towards death, which is another thing we can talk about in a second. Mm. While the woman's biological and also the feminine's movement is towards fullness. Right, like you said, sucking the things in, bringing them like a force, like almost like a black hole,
Or nurturing, I would say. Like,
yeah, no. I mean, I'm saying this in a bad way.
Like when you have a child in your womb.
Exactly. Well, that's what I was going to say. I was going to say, like sucking it in, and then in the fullest way, pregnancy, right? Fullness. Yeah. Most women are incredibly, when they're connected with that, incredibly happy when they're pregnant, because it's ultimate fullness, right? But it's a black hole, as in there can never be enough fullness, right? It can always be more and more and more and more. And actually the force of the attraction makes it more and more and more. And so fullness in all ways, in the simplest, as far as, many pairs of shoes and makeup and clothes, and in the most esoteric, the bearing a child and being full of the universe is the woman's and the feminine principle, while the masculine principle is going towards the very edge, towards death, right? The closer you can get to death in a practice
and conquer it,
the more blissful you will feel. So women's bliss is fullness, men's bliss is emptiness. And once again, when I come back from having taught 6 weeks on the road, like I just did, I want emptiness as well, right? Because I need my masculine needs a break, and then the moment I had a bit of emptiness, then I want fullness again. It's like, can I get another dog? Can I? It's like that kind of a feeling of more love. The more love, the better, right?
Or make your husband come home from his travels.
That too, yes. But
to get fullness.
To get fullness, right? Like, engage, be relational.
Yeah.
Talk about things, invite friends over, spend a lot of time together. That's my fullness. And, but also it could be that he comes home from his travel and he needs emptiness, which is, by the way, how a lot of relationships start going south. Yeah. That when my husband comes home and we live on, we live on the same property, but in separate buildings. He might need a day or two for that reason, right? Mm-hmm. He might need a day or two to just do nothing and have nothing to do before I put my fullness back there. And we've learned that about each other, and nowadays that works quite good. It didn't always, right? Because I do the same thing. I'm like, you're home. Let's talk. Let's get, let's exchange. And he'd be like, oh God, I've just been teaching for 4 weeks. I need to be quiet, right? And so we do things apart. When he goes motorcycle riding and does some fairly extreme sport things, and that's how he gets to emptiness. And meditation, of course, is a movement towards emptiness. Drinking is a movement towards emptiness. Yeah. Watching sports for many men is a movement towards emptiness. And those were once again the superficial ways to create emptiness: drinking, sports, and in women, shopping, hanging with the girlfriends, talking endlessly, eating ice cream. Those are substitutes for the real thing, which is to be found in the human sexual interaction, right? Where the man in the occasion comes as close to death in his consciousness while penetrating, and the woman gets completely full because she's being penetrated by the consciousness of the universe, not just by a man's genitals, right? And so that's then what makes for incredible sexual experiences. And most people have that ever so often spontaneously, but you can train for that. You can learn that. That's a skill that can be acquired, where the depth of the consciousness and the depth of life or life force or, pleasure or whatever, nature, come together and they play as a man and a woman.
Yeah, and you have that symbolized in the in the sacred feminine of the Grail.
Yes,
that is receiving from above the holy water, and when Deida says that the feminine is abundant,
yes,
that's it. It's a Grail floating over.
Yes,
but I have to say that first of all, people, when you get this book, and you should get it, you will see that even though me and Michaela here are philosophizing and talking principally very much, you'll see that this book is very down to earth, very concrete, very practical, like this is what you should do, this is not so smart, and it explains why. But further than that, I would say to you, Michaela, that many people will think that, okay, they are talking about these luxury subjects of love and sex, and while the world is suffering and blah, blah, blah. But actually, if people, as many people as possible, would do these things, would get these things, it would change the world. Because what we see now is the opposite. We see that there's a lot of people who... Actually, I don't know if you know about Wilhelm Reich.
I do, of course.
Yes, of course, right? And he was a genius, because he was one of the first who connected. He talks about the origins of fascism, or fundamentalism, if you want, this alienation of your own nature, of your own body, and it leads to the impotence of the male. It's the functions of the orgasm. They get frustrated, they become impotent, and they take out, and they become sadistic, psychosocial sadists. And this manifests then in a fiendish, cold society. And you see that in so many households. You have the male, like you say, he lies in the sofa, or he goes, or he's with the boys, but he's completely alienated from his woman. And his woman, she's frustrated, she's not satisfied. And both of them find substitutes for the misery and suffering, the pain inside. And they take it out then in very destructive social, political manifestations. It creates a very cold society. So if people would learn to, even if they read this book, they practice that, or they go to someone like you know, the courses you have or the consultations, and they start to connect, however they do this, it will change their whole personality, it will change the outlook, the understanding, and it will also, at the end of the day, it will change how people relate to each other. And it will change the world, actually, because that's how important sexuality and love is, in my view. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that?
I agree, absolutely. You know, I think all of these things can be seen through the lens of how close you are to your natural, however you want to call it, essence, right? And the further you are away, the more suppressed and perverted things become. You know? And I think you just said that beautifully in the biggest way, in the fascistic way, but even in the small ways, you know, the not being full and not allowing for fullness being perverted into shopping and eating and gossiping and, you know, and the not being able to...
Or I have one iota of power and you come to me like I'm a public servant, whatever, right? And I abuse that.
Exactly. Now you have no power anywhere except in your job. So all your thrust, all your direction, all your penetration comes out in giving out parking tickets or whatever, you know. That happens a lot, and it happens a lot in relationship when those darker areas are not tended to. Now, we haven't really spoken about that yet, and it's probably
the shadow. Oh, yes.
The shadow, and also the darker realms of sexuality, which are not the same as the shadow. The light realms of sexuality also have a shadow, right? And the dark realms of sexuality have a shadow. But the shadow, of course, you know, I'm Jungian trained to begin with, and the shadow and everything that comes with it is a very important piece. That's more a psychological exploration in the midst of the polarity piece. The polarity piece can be applied no matter what, and it has a very beautiful natural intelligence that straightens things out, right? And then you'll deal with shadows and stuff like that. But in the not so much shadow domain, but in the domain of spanning the spectrum of light and dark, how one can look at sexual relationship or intimate relationship is that there's the relationship part, the sameness, right? Then there's the polarity part, which is the pulling apart of the masculine and feminine for the sake of then playing with great erotic friction, is what they call it in my tradition. You know, with great erotic friction as two separates. Then you have moments of merging where you come together as one, right? Then you're being pulled apart. But how polarity and how the interaction between the two partners plays out is that the first piece is always being present with each other. So the way I teach it in the workshop is the first thing we establish is mutual presence, being with each other, looking at each other, eye contact, touch, breath, things of that nature. The next piece, and that's the important piece, is the opening of the heart, which we haven't talked about yet.
No.
Right? The availability, the vulnerability, the disclosing of one's underbelly, so to speak, right? Only then are all these practices, even S&M and bondage and whatever, any use is when the heart is involved, right? Before sex, before polarity, before masculine, feminine is, are you able to love? Are you able to be as love? And that's why it's so important. And these things can't be written about. They have to be done, that you tenderize your body to become an instrument of love. You know, that you work against the closures and the postures in your body that you have accumulated because you've been hurt. And then when you have been able to open the heart to somebody and you can be staying present, meaning you're concentrated in the attention on the other person, not masculine presence. Both people have to be present. Right? Just being with each other, the heart being open. Then you play with polarity, masculine and feminine. And then the final piece I teach that then offers a spectrum within the masculine and feminine is dark and light, from dark to light, and so that's then the flavors. It's like spices, so you can have a dark masculine or a medium masculine or a light masculine, and a dark feminine, like a more full-bodied dark expression versus a very angelic, innocent expression. But they're all needed, right? And so when people are deprived of the darker expressions of their sexuality, that's when they usually become kinked or violent or fascist, right? It's because and it can go really horrible.
Frigid in women, impotent in men.
Exactly. And frigid in women, and also, you can see it in what people watch. Like, for instance, to me, Game of Thrones is a classic. I'm assuming you've seen it.
I love Game of Thrones.
I do too. Believe me, I got on the kick. My European co-teacher introduced me to Game of Thrones, and I was disappeared for a week and a half.
Right.
But Game of Thrones is so popular because it supplies that darker, more violent sexual charge that most people don't get in their relationships. Now, it doesn't mean you want to maim and kill, but it's just a bit of a flavor. There's no salt. When you have no salt, you start craving salt. And so when you don't have a little bit of that loving violence, so to speak, right, that loving taking and tussling, you start looking for it in outside things. So Game of Thrones is fantastic that way. Or people start watching things on the news, about rapists and violence, and it's like, oh God, that's horrible. But somewhere in the body, there's a little bit of a taste. Or also, the kind of porn people watch says a lot about what they're not getting in their relationship. If you're missing spices. So one of the actual bodily educations in the realm of sexual yoga is to have a wide repertoire of spices, so to speak, that you can give your partner ever so often. Most people don't need a lot of it, right? Most people don't want to live a 50 Shades of Grey lifestyle. They just ever so often want that. And so you learn how to artfully, even just through a look or a touch or a word, right, do that. And the other person's, like you were saying, with you move the poster over, you give a little bit of a clear direction, and immediately everything softens, and it's just so good. And that's the gift and the generosity that we can give each other when we're not insisting on having gender wars.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and what you say brings my mind to, as a psychologist, you know very well that when children play, they kind of develop. It's a kind of development practice, playing. But what most people don't realize is that we never stop. It's just that when we are adults, these games, these plays are called sex.
Yes.
And so they don't realize what a huge healing potential exists in sex. But what do? They condemn themselves for their issues coming out in sex, because it can't come out anywhere else. So it comes out in sex, and then they feel bad at top of it. Instead of doing like you say, if the heart, because you can't heal if you don't have a heart in it.
Exactly.
What kind of healing is there without a heart, right?
There isn't. And so when people go to bondage clubs or something, they get a hit of something, but it's not the full thing, because no, not always. There is people who are very heart-centered in that area, but if you're not, then you're just reliving some kink from your, that started
some trauma,
childhood.
Some issue.
Exactly. Yeah. And that brings us back to, not all Tantra workshops are created equal, or however you want to say that. Of course, a lot of people who tend towards the sexual exploration had sexual trauma. And so it's very, very important to observe if the living out of certain things is just scratching an itch, or reliving some kind of a early traumatization in a more spiritual fashion, or in a more socially hip fashion, or if you, and there's people who can do some good healing in that way, and there's people who can't. And it's also important to understand that not all of these explorations lead to healing. Some of these things can be quite injurious.
Yeah, and push borders, and it can be worse and worse and worse, and become an obsession.
Yeah, and also there's something to be said when you are healthy in that domain. You can, you use these explorations yogically and not therapeutically. But if you had issues in that domain, you have to use them therapeutically and with care and with, a tendency towards stopping and waiting and healing and taking time and processing. While if you are kind of into pro sports, right? If you are an athlete, you wouldn't necessarily train like that. You would train to maximum capacity, but for that you have to have a healthy body, and in that case, a healthy sexual body. So the same techniques that can be used to traumatize somebody could be used to heal somebody, and they could also be used to make somebody a peak athlete. But those are different things.
Yeah. Wonderful. I wish we could continue.
I know, we need to do another one at some point.
This is the balance of being in the now and thinking about organizing an arrangement. So we have to move from the feminine to the masculine. But tell me one last thing. When is your book out, do you think?
Probably mid-year. I would say I just put my first complete draft in, and I would think that it's now being edited and all of that, and I'll probably do some rewrites. I finished everything over the holidays, so probably mid-year. There's also a whole bunch of new things coming on my website. And also an ongoing podcast being released next week that touches on some of these things and also on some of the more far out things.
We'll put up links in your guest presentation so people can find everything.
Great.
Now, I hope you realize that we need to get you back when the book is out.
Of course,
and
yes.
give some attention to that and continue this conversation, because I feel we're just we're just starting to take the first step, and then the bell rings.
I know, and we haven't even talked. There's so much good stuff we haven't talked about. Yes. And I'll be in Europe quite a bit this year, so we can arrange something in the same time zone, which will make things a bit better as well.
Yeah.
So.
Very nice, Michaela. I'm so glad I got to talk with you then today.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for coming on.
All right.
Bless you.
Oh, you too.
Yeah.
All of our files are free and will remain free. If you like the show, you can show support by donating $1 to help with expenses. Just use the PayPal link on our website, YouTube channel, or Facebook page. Thanks.